A stranger knocks on Miss Marple's door in the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, his eyes glinting with secrets only she might unravel. I know what you did in London, Miss Marple, he whispers, dredging up a long-forgotten scandal involving a stolen sapphire necklace and a betrayed friend, Clara Hartley. Who is Victor Grayson, and why does he know so much about her past? As cryptic clues and hidden rooms surface, Miss Marple must navigate a web of deception, chasing a truth that threatens to upend her quiet life. Will she outsmart a man who seems to know her every move? Or will the shadows of her youth bury her in their secrets? Dive into a tale of mystery, betrayal, and a village spinster's unrelenting quest for answers. Chapter 1. The unexpected visitor's late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, painting the cobblestone paths and thatched roofs with a warmth that belied the crisp autumn air. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. Her cottage, a quaint affair with ivy creeping up its stone walls, was a haven of quiet order, its shelves lined with books, and its hearth aglow with a modest fire. Outside, the village bustled gently. Mrs. Price from the bakery was sweeping her doorstep, and young Tommy Pierce darted past with a kite trailing behind him. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary day. But ordinary days, Miss Marple knew, had a way of turning peculiar. A sharp rap at the door startled her, the needles pausing mid-stitch. Visitors were not uncommon. Neighbors often popped by with gossip or a request for her keen insight, but this knock was different. It was firm, purposeful, almost impatient. She set her knitting aside, smoothed her tweed skirt, and adjusted her spectacles before making her way to the door. Opening it, she found a man standing on her doorstep, his silhouette framed against the fading light. He was tall, perhaps in his early 40s, with a lean build and dark hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes, a piercing shade of hazel, held a spark of amusement, as if he knew something she did not. His attire, a tailored overcoat and polished shoes, spoke of city sophistication, out of place in the rustic simplicity of St. Mary Mead. A faint smile played on his lips, but it was not entirely warm. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth, with a hint of an accent Miss Marple couldn't quite place. Perhaps London, perhaps something more traveled. "Miss Jane Marple, I presume?" She inclined her head, her expression polite but guarded. "You presume correctly, and you are Victor Grayson," he said, offering a slight bow that felt more theatrical than courteous. "I've heard a great deal about you, Miss Marple. Your reputation for, let's call it astute observation, precedes you." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Flattery was a tool she recognized well, often wielded by those with motives less than pure. "You're very kind," she replied, her tone mild. "But I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage. I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," Victor said, his smile widening. "But I know more about you than you might think. For instance, I know you spent a summer in London, long ago, when you were scarcely out of your youth. A governess, weren't you? In a grand house near Bloomsbury." The words landed like a pebble in a still pond, sending ripples through her composure. She hadn't thought of that summer in decades, a fleeting chapter of her life, when she was barely 20, teaching dispirited girls in a townhouse filled with heavy drapes and ticking clocks. It was a time she rarely spoke of, even to her closest friends. How could this stranger know? "You've done your research, Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Might I ask why you've taken such an interest in my past?" Victor's gaze flickered, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Let's just say I'm a student of history," he replied. "And your history, Miss Marple, is more intriguing than you might realize." May I come in? I promise not to take much of your time. Miss Marple hesitated. Her instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her this man was no idle caller. There was a purpose behind his charm, a sharpness in his eyes that suggested calculation. Yet curiosity, her old companion, tugged at her. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the sitting room. Very well, she said. I was about to have tea. Would you care to join me? I'd be delighted, Victor said, stepping inside with the ease of someone accustomed to being welcomed. The sitting room was cozy, its walls adorned with faded wallpaper and a few FRAMED watercolors of the village. Miss Marple directed Victor to a chintz-covered chair while she busied herself with the tea tray. The ritual of pouring tea Earl Grey, with a hint of bergamot, gave her a moment to study her guest. His hands, she noted, were well kept, with no calluses or signs of manual work. A gold signet ring gleamed on his left hand, engraved with an intricate crest she didn't recognize. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tension in the way he watched her, like a cat tracking a sparrow dot as she handed him a cup. She said, "You mentioned my time in London. I'm curious, Mr. Grayson, what exactly do you know about it?" Victor took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. Enough to know it wasn't all lesson plans and nursery rhymes. There was a situation, wasn't there? Something involving a young woman named Clara Hartley. The name struck her like a forgotten melody. Clara Hartley, a friend from that long ago summer. A spirited girl with a laugh like jimming bells and a penchant for trouble. They had parted ways after a scandal something Miss Marple had pushed to the back of her mind, a memory too tangled with youth and naivety to revisit. She kept her face composed, but her fingers tightened slightly on her teacup. Clara was an acquaintance, she said carefully, but that was a lifetime ago. Why bring her up now? Victor leaned forward, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, because, Miss Marple, some secrets don't stay buried. Clara's story didn't end when you left London, and I believe you're the only one who can help me piece it together. Piece what together? She asked, her tone sharper. Now, you're speaking in riddles, Mr. Grayson. If you have something to say, I'd prefer you say it plainly. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Plainly, very well. I believe Clara Hartley was wronged, and I think you know more about it than you've let on. I'm here to find out what and why. Miss Marple set her cup down, her mind racing. Clara's scandal had been a quiet one, hushed up by her family to avoid disgrace, a stolen item, whispers of betrayal, and a young man who vanished into the night. Miss Marple had been a bystander, or so she thought, caught up in the whirlwind of Clara's impulsive choices. Could she have missed something? And how did Victor Grayson, a man she'd never met, know so much? I'm not sure what you expect me to tell you, she said, meeting his gaze. If Clara was wronged, it's news to me. I was a governess, not a confidant. Whatever happened to her, I wasn't part of it. Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Perhaps, but you have a knack for noticing things others miss. I'd wager you saw more than you realized back then. And I'd like to know what it was. The air in the room felt heavier now. The fire's crackle the only sound. Miss Marple studied him, her mind sifting through possibilities. He could be a relative of Clara's, seeking closure, or perhaps a journalist, chasing a forgotten story. But something in his demeanor, the way he seemed to test her with every word, suggested a deeper motive. I'll need more than vague hints to help you, Mr. Grayson, she said at last. If you know something about Clara, tell me. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can't be of much use. Victor leaned back, his expression unreadable. Fair enough. Let's just say I'm looking for something Clara left behind, something valuable. And I think you might know where to start. Valuable? Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. You'll have to be more specific. He stood, brushing invisible lint from his coat. All in good time, Miss Marple. For now, I'll leave you to your tea and your memories. I'll be staying at the Blue Boar Inn for a few days. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. He moved toward the door, pausing to glance back. Oh, and one more thing. Be careful what you dig up. Some secrets are better left alone. With that, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Miss Marple sat motionless, her tea cooling in its cup. The room felt emptier without his presence, but the weight of his words lingered. She rose, crossing to the window to watch his figure disappear down the lane, his coat flapping like a dark wing in the evening breeze. Her gaze drifted to the bookshelf, where a small, locked box held her old diaries. She hadn't opened it in years, but Victor's visit had stirred something, a flicker of unease, a need to remember. Clara Hartley's name echoed in her mind, along with fragments of that summer, a glittering ballroom, a whispered argument, a sapphire necklace that vanished without a trace. She retrieved the key from her desk and unlocked the box, pulling out a leather-bound diary yellowed with age. The pages smelled of dust and time, and as she turned them, she found an entry dated July 1898. Her own neat handwriting described a night at the Harley townhouse where Clara had been radiant, flirting with a young man whose name Miss Marple hadn't recorded. The next entry mentioned the theft scandal that had sent Clara's family into a frenzy and ended Miss Marple's tenure as governess. But there was something else, a detail she hadn't thought significant at the time. A man in the shadows, watching Clara from across the room. He'd been older, with a sharp jaw and a cane topped with a silver wolf's head. Could he be connected to Victor? Or was her imagination, as it sometimes did, weaving patterns where none existed? She closed the diary, her resolve hardening. Victor Grayson knew too much, and his cryptic warnings suggested he wanted something more than answers. St. Mary Mead was no stranger to secrets, but Miss Marple had a way of unraveling them. She would invite him back, she decided, and press him for the truth. But first, she needed to know more about Clara Hartley and the scandal that had followed her like a shadow. The fire had dwindled to embers, and the village outside was settling into twilight. Miss Marple lit a lamp, her mind already mapping out her next steps. She would write to Colonel Bantry, who had connections in London and might recall the Hartley family, and she would visit the Blue Boar Inn to see what the locals made of their mysterious guest. As she penned a quick note to the colonel, a breeze rattled the window, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Miss Marple paused, her pen hovering over the paper. Victor Grayson had unsettled her, but he had also awakened something, a spark of curiosity, a challenge to her sharp mind. Whatever game he was playing, she would meet it head-on. The chapter of her past he'd opened would not close so easily, and Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet village life and her unassuming air, was not one to let a mystery pass unsolved. Chapter 2. Whispers of the past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak floor. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden, mingling with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed tea. Miss Marple sat at her small writing desk, her hands steady despite the unease that had settled in her chest. Since Victor Grayson's visit the previous day, his cryptic remarks about her time in London, a period she rarely revisited, had stirred something restless within her. She wasn't one to dwell on the past, but his words had been like a pebble dropped into a still pond, sending ripples through memories she'd long thought settled. She opened the drawer of her desk, its hinges creaking softly, and retrieved a small, leather-bound diary from 1898. The cover was worn, its edges frayed from years of careful handling, and the pages inside bore the neat, looping handwriting of a much younger Jane Marple. She adjusted her spectacles and began to turn the pages, her eyes scanning for any clue that might connect to Victor's unsettling familiarity. The diary was a relic of her brief stint as a governess in London, a time when she'd been barely 20, full of curiosity and a quiet determination to see more of the world beyond St. Mary Mead. The entries were mundane at first: notes about the weather, the strict routine of the household where she'd worked, and the 2 children in her care, a boy and a girl who were as spirited as they were disobedient. But as she flipped further, a name caught her eye: Clara Hartley. The mention was brief, almost incidental, tucked into a description of a summer garden party hosted by her employer, Lord Ashford. Clara had been a guest, a young woman with striking auburn hair and a laugh that carried across the lawn. Miss Marple's entry described her as charming but reckless, with a penchant for drawing attention. There was a hint of disapproval in the words, the kind only a young, observant governess might note. But there was more. A later entry, dated a few weeks after the party, mentioned a scandal. Clara had vanished from London society abruptly, leaving whispers of a theft of family heirloom, perhaps a necklace or a brooch, though the details were vague. Miss Marple's younger self had written, "The gossip is unkind, but there's truth in it somewhere." Clara's eyes held a secret, and not a happy one. The memory flickered now, dim but persistent, like a candle struggling against a draught. Clara's departure had been the talk of the household for weeks, but Miss Marple, preoccupied with her duties, hadn't pursued the matter. Now, Victor's knowing smile and his mention of a forgotten incident suggested he knew more than he should. She closed the diary, her fingers lingering on its cover. Victor's visit hadn't been a coincidence. He'd come to St. Mary Mead with purpose, and Clara Hartley was at the heart of it. But why? And how did he know of her connection to a woman she'd scarcely known decades ago? The questions gnawed at her, and she resolved to seek answers. Her first thought was of Colonel Bantry, an old friend whose military career had given him access to all manner of gossip and connections. If anyone could shed light on Clara's story, it was he. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt, and glanced at the clock. It was just past 9, early enough to pay a visit to Gossington Hall without seeming intrusive. She donned her coat and hat, picked up her trusty umbrella more for habit than necessity. As the sky was clear, and set off down the lane. The village of St. Mary Mead was waking slowly, with the baker's boy whistling as he cycled past and Mrs. Price from the post office sweeping her doorstep. Miss Marple nodded politely to passers-by, her mind already turning over the puzzle of Victor Grayson. Gossington Hall stood at the edge of the village, a sprawling Georgian manor surrounded by manicured lawns and ancient yews. Colonel Bantry was in the garden when she arrived, inspecting a rosebush with the same precision he'd once applied to military maps. His face lit up at the sight of her, though his bushy eyebrows rose in mild surprise. "Jane Marple, as I live and breathe," he boomed, brushing soil from his hands. "What brings you out so early? Not another village mystery, I hope?" She smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Not quite, Arthur, but I do need your help with something delicate." He gestured toward the conservatory, where they could sit in privacy. "Delicate, eh? Sounds like your sort of thing. Come along, then." The conservatory was warm, filled with the earthy scent of potted ferns and the faint sweetness of blooming orchids. Colonel Bantry poured tea from a silver pot, his movements practiced but unhurried. Miss Marple recounted Victor's visit, keeping her tone light but precise, omitting no detail of his demeanor or words. She mentioned Clara Hartley's name, and watched the colonel's face for any flicker of recognition. Clara Hartley, he mused, stirring his tea. Rings a bell, though it's been years. London, you say, around the turn of the century, 1898. To be exact, she replied. She was involved in some scandal of theft, I believe. I thought you might know more, given your connections. The colonel leaned back, his gaze distant. Harley, yes, I remember now. A wild sort, Clara was. Beautiful, but trouble followed her like a shadow. There was talk of a stolen heirloom, something valuable from her family. A necklace, I think, though the details were hushed up. Her father was a baronet, old money, and they didn't take kindly to the scandal. Sent her off to the country, if I recall, to avoid further embarrassment. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the information. Do you know what became of her? Not precisely, he admitted. The Harleys kept to themselves after that. But I do know the family still has an estate not far from here, Jane Mead, just beyond Chipping Cleghorn. Clara's niece, Eleanor, lives there now. Bit of a recluse, from what I hear. But the estate's still in their name. Jane Mead, Miss Marple repeated softly, as if testing the word. And this Eleanor, would she know about her aunt's past? Colonel Bantry shrugged. Hard to say. Families like that guard their secrets closely. But if anyone would know, it's her. Jane Mead's a crumbling old place, mind you. Not the sort of estate that draws visitors. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts racing. Jane Mead was close. Enough for a visit. And if Clara's niece was still there, she might hold the key to Victor's motives. But the colonel's next words pulled her attention back. This Victor chap, he said, frowning. What's he after, do you think? Stirring up old scandals for no reason seems a queer sort of game. I don't know yet, she admitted. But he knows more than he's letting on. And I intend to find out why. The colonel chuckled. You've got that look in your eye, Jane. Poor fellow doesn't know what he's up against. She smiled, faintly, but didn't reply. Her mind was already elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of Clara's story and Victor's cryptic hints. The walk back to her cottage was brisk, her steps purposeful despite her age. St. Mary Mead was quiet, but the village held its own secrets, and she knew better than most how to uncover them. Back at home, she sat again at her desk, the diary open before her. She reread the entry about Clara, searching for anything she might have missed. The words secret and reckless stood out, but there was another detail, almost overlooked, a mention of a man at the garden party, described only as a gentleman with a sharp gaze, too familiar with Clara. Could he have been the mysterious broker Victor seemed to know about? The thought sent a shiver through her, though she couldn't say why. She decided to visit Jane Mead the next day. A direct approach was best, she reasoned, though she'd need to tread carefully. Eleanor Hartley might not welcome questions about her aunt, especially from a stranger. Miss Marple penned a polite note, requesting a visit under the pretense of discussing local history, a plausible excuse. Given her reputation as a keen observer of St. Mary Mead's past, she sealed the envelope and entrusted it to the postmistress, Mrs. Price, who promised to deliver it promptly. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting a scarf for the church bazaar. Her needles clicked rhythmically, but her mind was far from the wool in her hands. She thought of Clara Hartley, a woman whose life had been upended by a single mistake, and of Victor Grayson, whose charming exterior hid something far less innocent. The puzzle was taking shape, but the pieces were still scattered, and she knew the path to Jane Mead would bring her closer to the truth or to danger. The next morning, she received a reply from Eleanor Hartley, written in a precise, elegant hand. The note was courteous, but brief, inviting Miss Marple to tea at Jane Mead that afternoon. There was a formality to it, almost a wariness, that piqued her curiosity further. She prepared carefully, choosing a simple but respectable dress and her best hat, knowing first impressions mattered with families like the Hartleys. The journey to Jane Mead was a short one by bus, followed by a walk along a winding country lane. The estate came into view as she crested a hill, its once grand facade now weathered, with ivy creeping up the stone walls and several windows boarded shut. The gardens were overgrown, though traces of their former beauty remained in the neatly trimmed hedges near the entrance. Miss Marple paused at the iron gate, her keen eyes taking in every detail: the rusted hinges, the faint path worn into the grass, the air of neglect that clung to the place like damp mist. She rang the bell, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal a young woman in a maid's uniform, her expression nervous but polite. "Miss Marple? I'm Lucy, Miss Hartley's maid. She's expecting you." Miss Marple smiled warmly, sensing the girl's unease. "Thank you, Lucy." "It's a lovely day for a visit, isn't it?" Lucy nodded, leading her through a dim hallway lined with faded portraits. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. They reached a drawing room where Eleanor Hartley waited, standing by a window that overlooked the tangled garden. She was in her late 30s, with sharp features and auburn hair that echoed Clara's, though her eyes held a guarded intensity. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and her posture was stiff, as if bracing for an unwelcome conversation. "Miss Marple," Eleanor said, extending a hand. "I was intrigued by your note." "Local history, you said?" "Yes," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chair. "St. Mary Mead has its share of stories, and I've heard the Hartley family has deep roots in the area. I thought you might share some insights about your aunt, Clara." Perhaps. Eleanor's smile faltered. "Just for a moment, Clara. She's been gone for years. I'm not sure what there is to tell." "Oh, just the little things," Miss Marple said lightly, her tone disarming. "I met her once, long ago in London. A remarkable woman, though I heard she faced some difficulties." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her teacup. "Difficulties. That's one way to put it. My aunt was impulsive. She made choices that cost her dearly, but that was a long time ago." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Of course. Families move on, don't they? Though sometimes the past has a way of lingering." The conversation drifted to safer topics: village events, the state of the estate, but Miss Marple sensed Eleanor's reluctance to discuss Clara. Lucy served tea, her hands trembling slightly as she poured, and Miss Marple noted the girl's unease. There was something here, something unspoken, and she resolved to find a way to draw it out. As they spoke, a shadow passed the window, a man's silhouette, brief but unmistakable. Eleanor's head turned sharply, and Lucy dropped a spoon. The clatter loud in the quiet room. Miss Marple pretended not to notice, but her heart quickened. She recognized the outline. "Victor Grayson. Someone you know?" she asked mildly, glancing at Eleanor. Eleanor hesitated, then forced a smile. "Just a visitor. A historian, he says, researching old estates. He's been here a few times. Fascinating." Miss Marple said, her tone neutral. "He must have a keen interest in your family's history." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. The visit ended soon after, with Miss Marple thanking her hostess and promising to return. As Lucy showed her out, the girl lingered at the door, her voice low. "Miss Marple," she whispered, "that man, Mr. Grayson, he's not what he seems. Be careful." Miss Marple met her gaze, her expression kind but firm. "Thank you, Lucy. I always am." The walk back to the bus stop was quiet, but Miss Marple's mind was anything but. Victor's presence at Dane Mead confirmed her suspicions. He was no casual visitor, and Lucy's warning, though vague, hinted at a deeper connection between him and the Harley family. The diary, Clara's scandal, the estate, it was all linked, and Victor was the thread tying it together. That evening, back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting idle in her lap. She thought of Clara Hartley, a woman whose recklessness had left ripples that reached across decades. She thought of Eleanor, guarding her family's secrets, and of Lucy, caught in the middle. And she thought of Victor, whose charm was a mask for something far more dangerous. Tomorrow, she would return to Dane Mead, not as a guest, but as an observer, watching from the shadows as only she could. The past was whispering, and Miss Marple was determined to hear its secrets. Chapter 3. The Harley Estate. Morning sun spilled over the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead, casting a golden sheen on the dew-kissed grass as Miss Marple stepped out of her cottage. Her mind buzzed with the enigma of Victor Grayson, the charming stranger who had stirred memories of a long-buried London summer. His cryptic hints about Clara Hartley and a forgotten scandal had set her sleuthing instincts alight. Armed with a basket of scones as a pretext for her visit, she set off toward the Hartley estate, a place whispered about in the village for its faded grandeur and secretive occupants. The walk was a pleasant one, through lanes lined with hedgerows, where sparrows chirped their morning gossip. Miss Marple's sharp eyes took in every detail. The way the blackberries hung heavy on the bushes, the faint wheel marks of a bicycle veering off toward the woods, and the distant hum of a tractor. She wore her usual tweed skirt and a sensible cardigan, her straw hat tilted against the sun. To any passerby, she was merely an elderly spinster out for a neighborly call. But her mind was a whirl of questions. Who was Victor Grayson, really? And why had he come to St. Mary Mead with secrets that tugged at the threads of her past? The Harley estate loomed at the end of a winding drive, its once proud manor house now sagging under the weight of time. Ivy clung to the weathered stone, and the windows stared blankly. Some shuttered, others cracked. The gardens, though, retained. A defiant beauty roses bloomed in unruly clusters, and a gnarled oak stood sentinel by the gate. Miss Marple paused, adjusting her basket, and noted the absence of gardeners. The estate felt alive yet abandoned, like a grand dame left to her memories. She knocked on the heavy oak door, its brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. The sound echoed, and after a moment, the door creaked open to reveal a young woman in a plain dress, her auburn hair pinned back tightly. "Yes," she said, her voice clipped but polite. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her smile warm and disarming. "I'm Jane Marple, from the village. I've brought some scones for Miss Eleanor Hartley. Might she be at home?" The woman hesitated, her green eyes flickering with suspicion before softening. "I'm Lucy, the maid. Miss Hartley's in, but she doesn't often take visitors. I'll ask." She took the basket and disappeared, leaving Miss Marple to study the entrance hall through the open door. A chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled by dust, and a grand staircase curved upward, its banister chipped. The air carried a faint scent of lavender and old wood. Lucy returned, her expression less guarded. "Miss Hartley will see you. This way, please." Miss Marple followed her through a maze of corridors, each lined with portraits of stern-faced Hartleys. The paintings seemed to watch her, their eyes glinting with secrets. She noted a faded tapestry depicting a hunt, its threads fraying at the edges, and a side table cluttered with unopened letters. The house whispered of neglect, yet there was an undercurrent of life, as if it were holding its breath. Eleanor Hartley awaited in a drawing room that clung to its former elegance. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows, and a fireplace stood cold, its mantel adorned with porcelain figurines. Eleanor herself was a striking woman in her late 30s, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair swept into a chignon. Her gray dress was impeccably tailored, but her eyes hazel and guarded betrayed a weariness. She rose from a wingback chair, her movements graceful but deliberate. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and measured. "How kind of you to call." "Lucy mentioned scones." A small gesture, Miss Marple replied, settling into a chair opposite. "I have heard so much about the Hartley estate, and I thought it time we met properly." Eleanor's lips curved into a polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The estate is rather quiet these days. I'm afraid we're not much for entertaining." "Oh, I quite understand," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "Houses like this have their own stories, don't they? I was a governess once in London, and I recall a Miss Clara Hartley. Your aunt, perhaps." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the armrest, a fleeting movement Miss Marple caught. "My aunt, yes," she said carefully. "She passed many years ago." "You knew her only briefly," Miss Marple said, her eyes soft but probing. "A spirited young woman, as I recall. There was some talk of an incident. I don't pry, of course, but memories do linger." Eleanor's gaze flickered to the window, where the garden stretched toward a crumbling gazebo. "Clara was complicated. The family doesn't speak of her much. Old wounds, you understand." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Families do have their secrets. I suppose that's why I was so surprised when a gentleman mentioned her recently. A Mr. Victor Grayson, I believe." The name landed like a stone in still water. Eleanor's posture stiffened, and her eyes snapped back to Miss Marple. "Victor Grayson," she repeated, her voice a shade too sharp. "What did he say about Clara?" "Oh, nothing specific," Miss Marple said, waving a hand as if it were trivial. "Just a passing remark about her London days. He seemed quite taken with the Hartley history." "Is he a friend of yours?" Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "Hardly. He's a historian, or so he claims. Showed up a week ago, asking to study the estate's archives. I let him poke around the library to be polite, but he's persistent." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes keen. "Persistent? In what way?" Before Eleanor could answer, the door swung open, and there stood Victor Grayson himself. He was tall, with a lean frame and dark hair swept back, his smile as polished as ever. "Miss Marple, what a delight to see you here." His voice was warm, but his eyes held a glint of calculation. "And Eleanor, I hope I'm not intruding." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she gestured to a chair. "Not at all, Mr. Grayson. Join us." Victor settled in, his ease almost theatrical. "I was just in the library, Eleanor, and I must say, your collection is remarkable. Those journals from the 1890s, fascinating stuff. Clara Hartley's era, wasn't it?" Miss Marple watched Eleanor's reaction, a flicker of unease, quickly masked. "The journals are private," Eleanor said coolly. "Family matters." "Of course," Victor said, his smile unwavering. "But history has a way of spilling out, doesn't it? I'd love to hear more about Clara." "Miss Marple, you knew her, I gather." Miss Marple met his gaze, her own smile serene but unyielding. "Oh, only in passing. A summer in London, long ago. My memory isn't what it was, I'm afraid." "Nonsense," Victor said, leaning forward. "You strike me as someone who forgets very little." The air grew taut, a silent duel of wits. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving Victor's. "And you, Mr. Grayson, seem to remember quite a lot. Tell me, what brings you to St. Mary Mead?" Surely not just old journals. Victor chuckled, but it sounded forced. Curiosity, mostly. The Harleys are a fascinating family. Scandals, heirlooms, hidden stories irresistible to a historian. Eleanor rose abruptly. If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. Miss Marple, thank you for the scones. Mr. Grayson, the library closes at 4. She swept out, leaving a chill in her wake. Victor's smile lingered, but his eyes followed Eleanor with a predatory focus. Miss Marple set her teacup down, her mind racing. Victor's presence here was no coincidence, and Eleanor's unease suggested he was stirring more than just memories. Such a charming estate, Miss Marple said, her tone conversational, though it must be a burden to maintain. Does Miss Harley manage alone? Victor shrugged, his casualness too practiced. She has Lucy, the maid, and a groundskeeper who's rarely seen. Eleanor's a private woman, but I think she's open to partnerships. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. Partnerships? Are you proposing one, Mr. Grayson? He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just a figure of speech. I'm here for the history, nothing more. They chatted briefly about the weather and the village, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. Victor's charm was a veneer, and his interest in the Harleys felt personal, not academic. When he excused himself to return to the library, she lingered, her eyes scanning the room. A bookshelf caught her attention, its lower shelf slightly askew, as if recently disturbed. Glancing at the door to ensure she was alone, Miss Marple knelt and examined the shelf. A faint seam suggested a hidden compartment. With a gentle tug, the panel gave way, revealing a small bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Her heart quickened as she slipped one out and scanned it. The handwriting was elegant. The ink faded but legible. Clara, you trusted the broker, and now we're ruined. The sapphire is gone, and so is he. Forgive me for what I must do. The letter was unsigned, but the mention of the broker and the sapphire sent a jolt through her. This was no mere scandal. It hinted at a theft, a betrayal, and a secret Clara had carried to her grave. Miss Marple tucked the letter into her handbag, replaced the panel, and stood just as Lucy re-entered. Miss Marple, are you all right? Lucy asked, her eyes wide. Oh, quite, Miss Marple said, smoothing her skirt. Just admiring the craftsmanship. This house is full of surprises, isn't it? Lucy nodded, her expression uneasy. Too many, if you ask me. Will you stay for lunch? Thank you, dear. But I must be going, Miss Marple said. Do give my regards to Miss Harley. As she walked back to the village, the letter weighed heavily in her bag. Victor's arrival, Eleanor's tension, and now this hidden note was a puzzle with pieces scattered across decades. Clara Harley's past was no longer a distant memory. It was a living mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it before Victor's charm wore his secrets did anymore. Damn it, the lane back to St. Mary Mead was quieter now, the sun higher, the sparrows silent. But Miss Marple's mind was anything but quiet. She thought of Clara, a woman she'd known only briefly, yet whose shadow loomed large. She thought of Eleanor, guarding her family's secrets with a fierceness that bordered on fear. And she thought of Victor, whose smile hid a purpose she couldn't yet name. The Harley estate had given her a clue, but it was only the beginning. Somewhere in its dusty corners, or in Victor's guarded words, lay the truth, and Miss Marple would find it, one careful step at a time. Chapter 4. The letters clued morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across her sitting room. She sat at her polished oak table. The hidden letter from the Harley estate spread before her, its edges yellowed and brittle. The words, written in Clara Harley's precise hand, seemed to pulse with secrets, each line a thread in a tapestry of betrayal that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. Her fingers traced the ink, pausing at the mention of the broker, a shadowy figure who had orchestrated a theft decades ago, a theft that had shattered Clara's life, and, perhaps, set the stage for Victor Grayson's mysterious arrival in St. Mary Mead. The letter was maddeningly cryptic. Clara wrote of a deal gone sour, a treasure lost to greed, and a man who wore charm like a mask. Miss Marple's sharp eyes narrowed as she reread the final line. The broker's shadow lingers, but I buried the truth where none will look. It was a clue, but to what? A place, a person, the sapphire necklace, perhaps. That had vanished all those years ago. Her mind, ever nimble despite her age, churned through possibilities. Victor's knowledge of Clara suggested he was no mere opportunist. He was connected to this past, and Miss Marple needed to know how. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her knitting bag, a habit that ensured no prying eyes would find it. The village clock chimed 10, a reminder of the day's tasks. She had resolved to seek out Inspector Craddock, a retired detective who had once investigated the Harley theft. If anyone could shed light on the broker, it was him. But first, she needed to confirm her suspicions about Victor. His polished demeanor and vague hints about her London days suggested a man who knew more than he let on. Was he a descendant of the broker, a victim seeking justice, or something more sinister? Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and straw hat, her appearance as unassuming as ever, though her mind was a whirl of calculations. She stepped out into St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes, where the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses. The village was stirring. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, waved from her shop, and young Tommy Pierce cycled past, delivering newspapers with a cheerful whistle. Miss Marple smiled politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She made her way to the vicarage, where the parish records were kept. If Victor was tied to the Harley family or the broker, there might be a trace of him or his kin in the dusty ledgers. The vicarage was a quaint stone building, its garden overrun with lavender. Reverend Clement, a kind but absent-minded man, greeted her at the door. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not another sermon critique, I hope." His eyes twinkled, though his tone held a mock weariness. She chuckled softly. "Not today, Reverend. I wondered if I might have a peek at the parish records. Old families. You know, purely for curiosity's sake." The vicar raised an eyebrow, but didn't pry. "Of course. The ledgers are in the study. Mind the dust, they haven't been touched in years." He led her to a small room lined with bookshelves, where leather-bound volumes sat in orderly rows. Miss Marple thanked him and set to work, her gloved fingers flipping through pages of births, deaths, and marriages from the 1890s, when Clara Harley's scandal had unfolded. The records yielded little at first. The Harleys were mentioned frequently, a prominent family with deep roots in the county. Clara's name appeared in a baptism entry from 1865, and later, a marriage to a man named Edward Langley, who died young. No mention of a theft or scandal, but Miss Marple hadn't expected the parish to document such things. She was about to close the ledger when a name caught her eye: Reginald Vance, listed as a witness to a Harley christening in 1892. The name sent a shiver through her. Could this be the broker? It was a tenuous link, but enough to warrant further digging. She thanked the vicar and stepped back into the sunlight, her mind racing. Reginald Vance. The name didn't appear in Clara's letter, but the timing fit. If he was the broker, or connected to him, the parish records might only be the first piece of the puzzle. Inspector Craddock would know more. She resolved to visit him that afternoon, but first, She needed to stop by the post office. Mrs. Price, with her knack for village gossip, might have heard something about Victor's comings and goings. The post office was a hub of activity, with villagers collecting letters and exchanging news. Mrs. Price, a stout woman with sharp eyes, was sorting parcels behind the counter. "Morning, Miss Marple," she called. "Heard about the fete? They're saying young Mr. Grayson's offered to fund the fireworks. Quite the generous sort, isn't he?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Very generous indeed. Has he been in often?" A new face always stirs curiosity. Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, he's been sending telegrams, lots of them. Always to London, and always in a hurry. Says he's a historian. But I've never seen a historian so jumpy about his post. Telegrams, you say?" Miss Marple's tone was light, but her mind catalogued the detail. "Any idea who he's contacting?" "Not a clue," Mrs. Price admitted. "But he's particular about privacy. Snapped at poor Tommy when he asked about one of the envelopes. Mind you, Tommy's nosy, but still bit sharp, wasn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Very sharp. Thank you, Mrs. Price. I'll be sure to try your new scones at the fete." She left the post office, her suspicions deepening. Victor's telegrams suggested he was coordinating with someone, perhaps an accomplice. The broker's shadow. Indeed, by noon, Miss Marple was on a train to Milchester, where Inspector Craddock lived in a modest cottage on the town's outskirts. The journey was short, but she used the time to reread Clara's letter, committing its phrases to memory. The train's rhythmic clatter was soothing, allowing her to piece together the fragments of the mystery. Clara's betrayal, the broker's theft, Victor's rival, it all pointed to a hidden truth, one she was determined to uncover before Victor made his next move. Craddock's cottage was a tidy affair, with a neatly trimmed hedge and a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. The inspector, now in his late 60s, greeted her with a warm smile. His hair was grayer than she remembered, but his eyes still held the keenness of a man who missed nothing. "Miss Marple," he said, ushering her inside. "I should have known you'd turn up with a puzzle. Tea?" "Always," she replied, settling into a chintz armchair. The sitting room was cozy, with a fireplace crackling and shelves lined with detective novels, a hobby Craddock had taken up in retirement. Over tea, she recounted her findings, Victor's cryptic knowledge, the Harley estate, and the letter mentioning the broker. Craddock listened intently, his fingers tapping the armrest. "The Harley case," he said at last, his voice heavy with memory. "A nasty business. Happened in '93, if I recall. A sapphire necklace worth of fortune vanished from the Harley estate during a ball. Clara Harley was the prime suspect, but there was no proof. The case went cold, but we always suspected an accomplice. Someone called the broker, though we never pinned a name to him." Miss Marple leaned forward. "Reginald Vance? Does that name mean anything to you?" Craddock's brow furrowed. "Vance? Yes, he was a guest at the ball. A charming fellow, by all accounts, but slippery. We questioned him, but he had an alibi. Some lord vouched for him." "Why do you ask?" She produced the letter, unfolding it carefully. "Clara mentioned the broker in this. I found a record of Vance in the parish ledgers, tied to the Harleys. And Victor Grayson, the stranger in St. Mary Mead, knows things about Clara that suggest a deeper connection. Could Vance have been the broker?" Craddock took the letter, his eyes scanning the faded ink. "It's possible. Vance disappeared after the theft. Some said he fled to the continent. Others thought he died. If this Grayson chap is linked to him." He trailed off, rubbing his chin. "I've got the old case files in the attic. Let me fetch them. While Craddock rummaged upstairs, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind weaving connections. If Vance was the broker, and Victor was his son or protege, then the sapphire necklace was likely the prize. Victor saw it. But why now? And why involve her? His references to her London days were no accident. She recalled that summer of 1892, when she was barely 20, working as a governess for a wealthy family. Clara Hartley had been a friend of her employer, a bright young woman with a penchant for trouble. There had been whispers of a scandal, but Miss Marple had been too young, too peripheral, to know the details. Or so she'd thought. Craddock returned, carrying a dusty cardboard box. Here we are, he said, setting it on the table. Everything we had on the Hartley theft. Witness statements, inventories, even a sketch of the necklace. He pulled out a yellowed photograph showing a dazzling sapphire pendant framed in diamonds. This was the prize, worth more than the Hartley estate itself back then. Miss Marple studied the photograph, her eyes lingering on the necklace's intricate design. And the broker this Vance was never caught, not for lack of trying, Craddock said. We had a lead on a young accomplice, though, a lad, maybe 20, seen lurking near the estate the night of the theft. No name, no clear description. He slipped through our fingers. He rifled through the box, producing a typed report. Here's something odd, though. Clara claimed she was framed, that someone planted evidence in her room, a glove, monogrammed with the initials RV. Reginald Vance, Miss Marple murmured. But if Clara was innocent, why not name him outright? Fear, maybe, Craddock suggested. Or loyalty. Some said she was sweet on Vance before it all went wrong. Love makes fools of us all. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Indeed it does. She leafed through the case files, her fingers pausing on a witness statement from a maid who'd seen a man matching Vance's description leaving Clara's room that night. The maid's name was scratched out, likely to protect her, but the detail stuck. A man in Clara's room, a glove, a betrayal. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. Inspector, she said, her voice steady, would you mind if I borrowed these files? Just for a day or two. I'd like to cross-reference them with Clara's letter. Craddock hesitated, then nodded. You've got a nose for this, Miss Marple. Just don't go stirring up trouble without me. Trouble? She smiled innocently. I'm only a curious old spinster. He laughed, but his eyes were serious. Curious, my foot. I'll expect a full report when you're done. As Miss Marple boarded the train back to St. Mary Mead, the case files tucked securely in her bag, she felt a familiar thrill. The mystery was deepening, and Victor Grayson was at its heart. His telegrams, his charm, his sudden interest in the Hartley estate, it all pointed to a man with a purpose. But what? Revenge, greed, or something more personal? Back in her cottage, she spread the files across her table, the letter beside them. The evening light cast long shadows, and the village was quiet save for the distant bleat of sheep. She lit a lamp and began reading, her eyes darting between Clara's words and the police reports. Hours passed, the clock ticking past midnight, but Miss Marple barely noticed. A pattern emerged. Vance had been a master manipulator, charming his way into the Hartley's circle, only to vanish when the necklace did. Clara's letter hinted at a double cross, but the files suggested she'd been complicit until she wasn't. One detail stood out. A second theft, mentioned in passing in Craddock's notes, a week after the necklace vanished. A smaller item, a silver locket, had been stolen from Clara's room. The police dismissed it as unrelated, but Miss Marple's instincts flared. Clara's letter mentioned burying the truth. Could the locket be a key, a hiding place for a clue? She made a note to ask Eleanor about it. If the locket was still In the Harley estate, it might hold answers. The next morning, Miss Marple woke early, her mind buzzing. She decided to visit the Harley estate again, but first, she needed to observe Victor. The village fete was tomorrow, and Mrs. Price had mentioned his involvement. It was the perfect chance to watch him in public, to see who he spoke to, how he moved. If he was the broker's heir, he'd be careful but not careful enough to evade her. She dressed in her usual understated style, but her eyes were sharp as she stepped into the village square. The fete preparations were in full swing, bunting hung from lampposts, and stalls were being set up for cakes and jams. Victor was there, directing a group of boys carrying crates of apples. His smile was easy, his manner polished, but Miss Marple noticed the way his eyes flicked to the crowd as if searching for someone or watching for trouble. She approached, her tone light. "Mr. Grayson, how kind of you to help with the fete. The village is lucky to have such a generous newcomer." He turned, his expression warm but guarded. "Miss Marple, I'm only doing my part. St. Mary Mead's been welcoming." His pause was slight, but she caught it. "I'm sure," she said, "though I wonder your interest in local history. Does it extend to the Harleys, such a fascinating family?" His smile didn't falter, but his eyes tightened. "Oh, I've heard a few stories. Old scandals, you know. Nothing concrete." "Of course," she replied, her voice mild. "Old scandals have a way of resurfacing, don't they?" She let the words hang, watching his reaction. He laughed, but it was a shade too quick. "Only if someone digs them up," he said, tipping his hat. "Excuse me, I've got to check on those fireworks." He walked away, his stride purposeful, and Miss Marple noted the tension in his shoulders. She spent the rest of the day preparing for the fete, but her mind was on the case files. That evening, she sat by her fire, the documents spread out once more. A photograph slipped from the pile, a grainy image of the Hartley ball, taken before the theft. Clara stood in the center, radiant in a silk gown, her eyes fixed on a man at her side. He was tall, dark-haired, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The caption read, "Miss Clara Hartley and Mr. Reginald Vance, 1893." Miss Marple's breath caught. The resemblance was faint but unmistakable. Victor's sharp jaw, his way of tilting his head, it was there, in Vance's stance. Father and son, or a carefully crafted persona, she couldn't be sure. But the connection was too strong to ignore. As the clock struck 11, she made a decision. Tomorrow, at the fete, she'd keep a close eye on Victor. If he was after the necklace or the locket, he might slip up in the crowd. And if Eleanor could confirm the locket's existence, it might unlock the final piece of Clara's secret. She closed the files, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked through her thoughts. The broker's shadow lingered, just as Clara had written. But Miss Marple was no stranger to shadows. She'd faced them before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond, and she'd faced this one too. With a quiet resolve, she set her knitting aside and went to bed, ready for the fete and whatever secrets it might reveal. Chapter 5. Shadows of suspicion. The late summer sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths and thatched roofs. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles clicking softly, though her mind was far from the scarf taking shape in her lap. The air carried the faint scent of roses and the distant hum of village life, but her thoughts were tethered to the enigmatic Victor Grayson, his cryptic references to her past, his polished charm, and now the unsettling revelations from Inspector Craddock about a decades-old theft gnawed at her. She adjusted her spectacles, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon as if it might yield answers. Victor was no ordinary visitor. and the sapphire necklace the heart of an unsolved mystery seemed to pulse beneath his every word. Inspector Craddock's visit that morning had been brief but illuminating. Over tea in her modest parlor, he'd shared details of the case that had haunted his early career. It was 1895, Miss Marple, he'd said, his voice gravelly with memory. A sapphire necklace. The Harley star vanished from the Hartley estate during a ball. Worth a fortune, it was deep blue stones, each the size of a robin's egg, set in gold filigree. We pinned it on a man called the broker, but his accomplice, a young lad, slipped through our fingers. Never caught him. His eyes had narrowed. This Victor of yours, his age fits. And there's something in his manner to smooth, like he's playing a part. Miss Marple had nodded, her mind already weaving connections. Victor's rival in St. Mary Mead, his pointed references to her time as a governess in London. And now this link to the Harley starret was no coincidence. She'd seen men like him before, in her youth and in the quiet corners of village life, charmers with secrets. Their smiles a mask for ambition or revenge. But what did Victor want? The necklace, redemption for a past wrong, or something darker? She set her knitting aside and rose, smoothing her lavender skirt. The village fete was tomorrow, a bustling affair of stalls, games, and gossip that would draw every soul in St. Mary Mead. Victor had mentioned attending, and Miss Marple intended to observe him closely. People revealed themselves in crowds. She knew when they thought no one was watching, their masks slipped. The fete dawned bright and warm, transforming the village green into a kaleidoscope of color. Bunting fluttered between ancient oaks, and the air buzzed with laughter, the clink of teacups, and the shouts of children chasing ribbons. Stalls lined the green, offering everything from Mrs. Wick's prize-winning jams to Mr. Pye's dubious homemade cider. Miss Marple, dressed in her best navy hat and a crisp white blouse, moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who belonged yet saw everything. Her eyes, bright and unyielding, darted from face to face, seeking Victor. She found him near the tombola stall, his dark hair catching the sunlight as he leaned down to charm Mrs. Bantry. Dolly Bantry, ever susceptible to a handsome face, was laughing, her cheeks flushed. Victor's tailored suit and easy grin made him stand out among the villagers. But Miss Marple noted the way his gaze flickered, scanning the crowd as if searching for someone or something. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he called, spotting her. His voice was warm, but his eyes held a glint of calculation. "Enjoying the fete?" "Very much, Mr. Grayson," she replied, her tone light, but her smile measured. "It's a fine day for it. Though I dare say you're not here just for the scones." He laughed, a rich sound that turned heads. "You're too sharp for me, Miss Marple. I confess, I'm partial to a bit of village charm. Reminds me of stories my father used to tell about places like this, where secrets hide in plain sight." The barb was subtle, but it landed. Miss Marple's lips twitched, betraying nothing. "Secrets do have a way of surfacing," she said, "especially when the light's just right." Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Before he could reply, Mrs. Bantry tugged his arm, eager to introduce him to the vicar. Miss Marple drifted away, her mind racing. He was baiting her, testing her knowledge of the past. But why? She paused by the cake stall, where Mrs. Wicks was, fussing over a lopsided Victoria sponge. "Jane, dear, have you tried my lemon drizzle yet?" Mrs. Wicks asked, her apron dusted with flour. "Not yet, Margaret," Miss Marple said, her eyes still on Victor across the green. "But I'll take a slice for later. Tell me, have you spoken to that young man, Mr. Grayson?" "Oh, him." Mrs. Wicks beamed. "Such a gentleman. Bought 3 jars of my marmalade and said he'd send some to his mother in London. Said she'd love the recipe. Did he now? Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her mind noted the detail. Victor claimed to be from London, yet his accent had a faint trace of something else Devon, perhaps, or Cornwall. A small inconsistency, but enough to deepen her suspicion. As the afternoon wore on, Miss Marple kept Victor in her peripheral vision. He moved effortlessly through the crowd, shaking hands, complimenting the vicar's sermon, even helping little Tommy Price retrieve a kite from a tree. Yet there was a purpose to his movements, a watchfulness that mirrored her own. She was about to approach him again when a commotion erupted near the jewelry stall. Oh, my brooch. Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, was clutching her chest, her face pale. It's gone. My mother's emerald brooch was pinned right here. The crowd buzzed, heads turning. Miss Marple's gaze snapped to Victor, who was now at the edge of the green, speaking to a weary man in a flat cap. The man's posture was tense, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Victor's expression was unreadable, but his eyes flicked toward the jewelry stall. Calm now. Mrs. Harmon, Miss Marple said, stepping forward. When did you last see it? Just 10 minutes ago. Mrs. Harmon wailed. I was showing it to Mrs. Bantry, and then I went to get a cup of tea. The accusation hung unspoken, but eyes turned to Victor. He was the stranger, the outsider. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Miss Marple, however, noticed something else, a young woman hovering near the tea tent, her hands twisting in her apron. Lucy, Eleanor Harley's maid, looked as if she might bolt. Miss Marple excused herself and approached Lucy, her steps deliberate but unhurried. Lucy, dear, she said softly, you look troubled. Is something wrong? Lucy's eyes widened, her freckled face flushing. And no, Miss Marple, I'm just helping with the tea. Of course, Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. But you were near the jewelry stall earlier, weren't you? I saw you admiring Mrs. Harmon's brooch. Lucy's hands froze, and she glanced toward Victor, who was now laughing with the vicar, seemingly oblivious to the drama. I didn't take it, she whispered, her voice trembling. I swear, Miss Marple, I didn't. I believe you, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. But if you know something, you must tell me. It's the only way to make things right. Lucy hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice barely audible. It's him, Mr. Grayson. He was talking to Mrs. Harmon, saying how pretty her brooch was. I saw him touch it, like he was studying it. And then he looked at me, and I got scared. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was razor sharp. Thank you, Lucy. You've done the right thing. Now, let's see about that brooch. She guided Lucy to a quiet corner near the churchyard, away from prying eyes. Check your apron, dear, she said, her tone casual. Sometimes things get caught without us noticing. Lucy frowned but reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers closed around something, and her eyes widened as she pulled out the emerald brooch, its green stone glinting in the sunlight. Oh, no, she gasped. How did this? Never mind how, Miss Marple said, taking the brooch and slipping it into her handbag. The important thing is that it's found. I'll return it to Mrs. Harmon discreetly. But Lucy, you must tell me everything you know about Mr. Grayson. Lucy bit her lip, then nodded. He's been coming to the Harley estate a lot. Miss Eleanor, she's different when he's around. Nervous, like she's hiding something. He keeps asking about her Aunt Clara, and a necklace. He says it's worth a fortune. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained calm. A necklace, you say? Yes, miss. He told Miss Eleanor it's hidden somewhere on the estate. He's been poking around, looking in old rooms, asking about secret places. I don't trust him. Miss Marple, there's something wrong about him. Thank you, Lucy, Miss Marple said, patting her hand. You've been very brave. Now, go back to the tea tent and don't say a word about this. I'll handle Mr. Grayson. As Lucy hurried off, Miss Marple returned the brooch to Mrs. Harmon, spinning a tale about finding it near the stall. The vicar's wife was overjoyed, and the crowd's suspicions shifted away from Victor. But Miss Marple's focus sharpened. The brooch incident felt like a distraction, a sleight of hand. Victor was playing a deeper game. She found a bench near the church and sat, pretending to admire the flower arrangements while watching Victor. He'd moved to the edge of the green, where the weary man in the flat cap was waiting. They spoke in low tones, their heads close together. Miss Marple strained to hear, but the distance was too great. Then, as if sensing her gaze, Victor turned, his eyes locking with hers. For a moment, the fate faded the laughter, the music, the clatter of teacups. It was just the two of them, a silent challenge passing between them. Victor broke the moment with a nod and a smile, then slipped into the crowd. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her handbag. She needed to act quickly. The church bell tolled 5, and she remembered the public telephone near the post office. If Victor was making moves, she needed to know his next step. She made her way to the telephone, her steps brisk but unhurried. A picture of an elderly lady enjoying the day. Inside the booth, she dialed Inspector Craddock's number, but there was no answer. Frustrated, she stepped out and nearly collided with young Tommy Price, who was clutching a sticky toffee apple. Sorry, Miss Marple. Tommy grinned, then lowered his voice. I saw that man, Mr. Grayson, by the church. He was on the telephone, talking real quiet-like. I heard him say something about a necklace and settling old scores. Sounded important. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. You're a sharp one, Tommy. Thank you. Now, run along and enjoy the fate. As Tommy scampered off, Miss Marple's mind raced. The necklace and settling old scores, Victor's words confirmed her suspicions. He wasn't just after the Harley star. There was a personal vendetta at play. But whose score was he settling? Clara Hartley's, the broker's, or someone else entirely? The fate was winding down, the crowd thinning as families headed home. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning for Victor. He was gone, but the weary man in the flat cap was still there, loitering near the tombola stall. She approached, her demeanor frail and harmless. Excuse me, young man, she said, her voice quavering slightly. I seem to have lost my way to the post office. Could you point me in the right direction? The man blinked, caught off guard. UH, sure. Ma'am, it's just down the lane, past the bakery. Thank you, she said, peering at him through her spectacles. You're not from St. Mary Mead, are you? I saw you with Mr. Grayson earlier. A friend of his, perhaps. His face tightened, and he shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. Just passing through, he muttered, then turned and walked away, his steps quick. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloging his reaction. He was no villager, and his unease suggested he was more than a casual acquaintance of Victor's. A partner, perhaps, or a hired hand. The puzzle was growing, but the pieces were starting to fit. As the sun set, casting the green in a golden glow, Miss Marple made her way home. The fate had been more than a pleasant distraction. It had confirmed Victor's intentions and revealed new players in the game. She would need to tread carefully. The Harley star was more than a jewelette, was a key to a past that refused to stay buried. Back in her cottage, she lit a lamp and settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched. She opened her notebook, jotting down the day's observations: Victor's charm, the brooch; Lucy's fear, the weary man, the telephone call. Each detail was a thread, and Miss Marple was adept at weaving them into a tapestry of truth. Tomorrow, she would visit the Harley estate again, armed with new questions. Victor was circling closer to his prize, but so was she. And in St. Mary Mead, where secrets hid in plain sight, Miss Marple knew the light would soon reveal all. Chapter 6. The village fete incident. Sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden haze across the village green, where the annual fete buzzed with life. Stalls lined the lawn, their awnings fluttering in the late summer breeze, offering everything from homemade jams to whereupon tea cozies. Children darted between tables, clutching sticky toffee apples, while the vicar's voice droned over a megaphone, announcing the winner of the Best Marrow competition. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath a striped canopy, her knitting needles clicking softly, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. The air smelled of fresh grass and warm scones, but beneath the cheerful chaos, a thread of unease tugged at her instincts. She had come to observe Victor Grayson, the enigmatic stranger who had unsettled her with cryptic hints about her past. His presence in the village, with his polished charm and evasive answers, felt like a shadow moving across a sunny day. Today, he was here, weaving through the fate with an ease that made him both conspicuous and invisible, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, and yet, to Miss Marple's keen gaze, always watching. She adjusted her spectacles, her fingers pausing over her wool, as she noted his path toward the jewelry stall, where a small crowd had gathered. The stall, run by Mrs. Elsie Price, the village's self-proclaimed arbiter of taste, displayed an array of trinkets, glass beads, silver charms, and one standout piece of delicate brooch shaped like a peacock, its tail studded with tiny emeralds. It was a donation from the Harley estate, Eleanor's contribution to the fate's fundraising efforts, and its value had sparked whispers all morning. Miss Marple had overheard Mrs. Price boasting that it was worth at least £100, maybe more, a claim that drew curious onlookers, and she suspected less savory attention. Victor lingered near the stall, his dark coat a stark contrast to the bright linens around him. He leaned in to speak with Mrs. Price, his smile disarming, his gestures fluid. Miss Marple's lips pursed. He was too smooth, too deliberate. She shifted her gaze to the crowd, her mind sifting through the faces like cards in a deck. There was young Tommy Pierce, notorious for pilfering sweets, Mrs. Bantry, fussing over her roses at the flower stall, and Lucy Cobb, Eleanor Harley's maid, hovering near the edge of the jewelry display. Lucy's hands twisted in her apron, her eyes darting nervously toward Victor. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Something was amiss. The fete carried on, with laughter and chatter swelling around the green. A brass band struck up a jaunty tune, and the vicar called for volunteers for the sack race. Miss Marple declined an offer of lemonade from a passing girl, her attention fixed on Lucy. The maid was slight, no older than 20, with a pale face framed by a plain bonnet. She had been at the Harley estate during Miss Marple's visit, silent but watchful, her demeanor suggesting more than the usual deference of a servant. Now, as Lucy edged closer to the jewelry stall, her movements were jerky, her eyes flitting between Victor and the brooch. A sudden cry pierced the air. "It's gone!" Mrs. Price's voice, shrill and indignant, cut through the band's melody. The crowd turned, a ripple of murmurs spreading. The peacock brooch was right here. She gestured wildly at the velvet cloth where the brooch had gleamed moments before. Someone's stolen it. The accusation hung like smoke, and eyes turned instinctively to Victor, who stood nearby, his hands in his pockets, his expression one of mild surprise. Good heavens, he said, his voice carrying just the right note of concern. How dreadful. Was it very valuable? Mrs. Price's face reddened. Valuable? It was priceless. Donated by Miss Harley herself. And you? She pointed a trembling finger at Victor. You were right here, asking about it. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A mix of suspicion and excitement. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind racing. Victor's calm was too perfect, his surprise too practiced. But her gaze flicked back to Lucy, who had gone rigid, her hands clutching her apron as if it might anchor her. The girl's face was a mask of panic, her eyes locked on the ground. Now, Victor said, raising his hands. I'm flattered by the attention, but I assure you, I've no interest in trinkets. He flashed a smile, and a few villagers chuckled, charmed despite themselves. Perhaps it was misplaced. These things happen at busy fêtes. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt, and approached the stall with the quiet authority of someone who had unraveled far knottier problems than a missing brooch. Mrs. Price, she said gently, might I have a look? Sometimes, in the bustle, things slip out of sight. Mrs. Price, flustered but mollified by Miss Marple's calm, nodded. Well, if you think so, Miss Marple. But I swear it was right here. Miss Marple leaned over the stall, her eyes scanning the velvet cloth, the scattered pins, the small wooden box where Mrs. Price kept her takings. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the brooch was undeniably gone. She glanced at Victor, who met her gaze with a flicker of amusement, as if daring her to accuse him. But her attention returned to Lucy, who had stepped back, her hands still twisting in her apron. Lucy, dear, Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a lullaby, you were helping at the stall earlier, weren't you? Did you see anyone lingering? Lucy's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to speak, then clamping shut. And now, Miss Marple, she stammered. I was just tidying up. Tidying up, Miss Marple repeated, her tone kind but probing. Of course, it's easy to get flustered. In such a crowd, she stepped closer, her eyes catching a faint bulge in Lucy's apron pocket. Might I see your apron, dear? Just to be sure nothing's caught in it by mistake. Lucy froze, her hands flying to her pocket. It's nothing, really, her voice was high, almost a squeak. The crowd's attention shifted, and Victor's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he watched the exchange. Miss Marple's hand rested lightly on Lucy's arm. No one's accusing you, my dear, but sometimes things find their way into pockets by accident. Shall we check? Lucy's shoulders slumped, and with trembling fingers, she reached into her apron and pulled out the peacock brooch, its emeralds glinting in the sunlight. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Price's hand flew to her mouth. Lucy Cobb, you little thief, I didn't steal it. Lucy's voice broke, tears welling in her eyes. I swear, I found it on the ground, and I was going to give it back. But, her gaze darted to Victor, then away, as if burned. Miss Marple took the brooch gently, turning it over in her hands. There, she said, her voice soothing. No harm done. Let's return this to Mrs. Price and sort it out quietly. She handed the brooch to the stallholder, who clutched it like a lifeline, still glaring at Lucy. The crowd began to disperse, drawn back to the fate's distractions. But Miss Marple's mind was alight. Lucy's panic, Victor's watchful stillness, it was a puzzle with pieces that didn't yet fit. She guided Lucy to a bench under an oak tree, away from prying ears, and sat beside her, her expression one of grandmotherly concern. Now, Lucy, she said, tell me what happened. No one's listening but me. Lucy's hands twisted in her lap, her bonnet casting a shadow over her tear-streaked face. I didn't steal it, Miss Marple. I swear it. I saw it on the ground near the stall, and I picked it up to give it back. But then he looked at me. Miss Marple's voice was gentle, but her eyes sharpened. Do you mean Mr. Grayson? Lucy nodded, her voice barely a whisper. He was watching me all the time. He's always watching when he comes to the estate. It makes me nervous, like he knows something I don't. I didn't want him to think I took it, so I hid it in my pocket. I was going to put it back, honest. Miss Marple patted her hand. I believe you, dear. But why does Mr. Grayson make you so nervous? Has he said something to you? Lucy hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the fate, where Victor was now chatting with the vicar, his demeanor as polished as ever. He's always at the estate, talking to Miss Eleanor. He says things about the house, about things hidden there, old things. He makes her upset, but she won't. Send him away. And he looks at me sometimes, like he's waiting for me to slip up. Miss Marple's mind turned over Lucy's words. Victor's interest in the Harley estate, his cryptic hints about Clara Harley's past, and now this incident with the brooch was no coincidence. He was testing the waters, stirring trouble, perhaps to distract or to provoke. But why? And why involve Lucy? A mere maid, Lucy. Miss Marple said, her voice firm but kind. Has Mr. Grayson ever asked you about anything specific at the estate? Papers, perhaps, or objects? Lucy bit her lip. He asked about the library once. Said there might be old books or letters worth something. I told him I don't go in there, it's Miss Eleanor's private place. But he kept asking. And Miss Eleanor, she's been strange since he started coming. Like she's afraid of him. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. The library, where she had found Clara's hidden letter, was clearly significant. Victor's interest in it suggested he knew more than he let on, perhaps about the sapphire necklace, or something deeper. And Lucy, caught in the middle, was both a witness and a pawn. Thank you, Lucy, Miss Marple said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. You've done the right thing by telling me. Now, go enjoy the fete, and don't worry. I'll see that this is sorted out. Lucy managed a shaky smile and stood, brushing at her apron. As she walked away, Miss Marple's gaze returned to Victor, who was now tossing a ball in a game with the village children, his laughter ringing out. But his eyes, she noted, flicked toward her, and for a moment, their gazes locked. His smile didn't waver, but there was a challenge in it, a silent acknowledgement of the game they were playing. The fete continued into the afternoon, with the band playing and the children shrieking in delight. Miss Marple returned to her knitting, but her mind was far from the stitches. Victor's influence over Eleanor, his probing questions, and now the brooch incident, it was all connected. A web spun with careful intent. She thought of Clara's letter, with its mention of the broker and a betrayal long buried. Victor's presence was no accident. He was here to unearth something, and Miss Marple was determined to find out what before he did. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the green, Miss Marple made her way to the refreshment tent, where she knew Lucy would be helping. With the tea urns, she found the girl pouring cups, her hands steadier now, but her eyes still wary. Miss Marple accepted a cup of tea, her voice low as she spoke. Lucy, dear, she said, I'd like you to do something for me. If Mr. Grayson visits the estate again, would you let me know? Quietly, of course. Just a word or two. Lucy nodded, her expression a mix of relief and resolve. I will, Miss Marple. I don't trust him, not one bit. Good girl, Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. And don't worry, We'll get to the bottom of this. As she walked back to her cottage, the fates' music fading behind her, Miss Marple's mind churned with possibilities. Victor was no mere opportunist. He was hunting something specific, and the Harley estate was the key. The brooch incident, she suspected, was a diversion, a way to test the village's reactions or to unsettle Eleanor further. But Lucy's trust was a small victory, a crack in Victor's carefully constructed facade. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles tucked into her bag. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play her hand. The evening settled over St. Mary Mead, the village green emptying as stalls were packed away. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her diary open, jotting down her observations. Victor Grayson, with his charm and his secrets, was a puzzle she would unravel piece by piece, and Lucy, with her nervous honesty, might just be the key to unlocking it all. Chapter 7. Lucy's revelations. Late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the worn oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The familiar ritual usually brought her calm, but today her mind was far from the tidy loops of wool. Victor Grayson's shadow loomed large, his cryptic hints about Clara Harley's past and his unsettling presence at the Harley estate, gnawing at her thoughts. The village fate, with its stolen brooch and whispered suspicions, had only deepened her unease. Now, with Lucy, Eleanor's nervous young maid, sitting across from her, Miss Marple sensed a crack in the mystery one she intended to pry open. Lucy fidgeted with the hem of her apron, her eyes darting to the teapot as if it might offer her courage. The girl was no more than 20, with a round face framed by dark curls that escaped her cap, and a manner that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Miss Marple poured tea with deliberate care, letting the silence stretch just enough to coax Lucy into speaking. "You're very kind to have me here, Miss Marple," Lucy began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I should have come, but after the fate, after that brooch," Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind their gentle twinkle, noted the tremble in Lucy's hands. "You did the right thing, my dear," she said softly, sliding a cup across the table. "Returning the brooch was brave, and I suspect there's more you'd like to say. I'm all ears." Lucy's cheeks flushed, and she took a sip of tea, clutching the cup like a lifeline. "It's Mr. Grayson, ma'am. He's been coming to the estate more than Miss Eleanor lets on. He's pushing her to sell it. Says it's not worth keeping with all the debts. But it's not just that. He's always asking about things, old things, family things. I think he's after something specific." Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. "Something specific?" she prompted, her tone light but probing. "What sort of things does he ask about?" Lucy hesitated, glancing at the window as if expecting Victor to appear in the garden. "He's always talking about Miss Clare, Miss Eleanor's aunt. You." "No. He asks about her jewelry, her papers, anything she might have left behind. Last week, I overheard him in the library with Miss Eleanor, saying the estate's got secrets worth more than the land itself. He mentioned a necklace, a sapphire one." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. The sapphire necklace. Inspector Craddock's tale of the unsolved theft flickered in her mind. "A necklace," she repeated, as if it were a passing curiosity. "Did he say anything more about it?" Lucy nodded, her voice dropping lower. "He said it was hidden somewhere on the estate, and if Miss Eleanor sold the place, he'd make sure she got her share of whatever it's worth. But the way he said it didn't sound kind, ma'am. It sounded like a threat. Miss Eleanor's been different since Jumpy, like she's afraid of him." Miss Marple leaned back, her mind racing. Victor's interest in the necklace confirmed her suspicions, but his motives remained murky. Was he merely a fortune hunter? Or was there a deeper connection to Clara's past, and why pressure Eleanor to sell? The estate, crumbling though it was, held more than sentimental value, it held answers. "You've been very helpful, Lucy," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but firm. "But tell me, why do you think Victor frightens Miss Eleanor so?" Lucy bit her lip, her fingers twisting the apron. "It's not just her, ma'am. He frightens me too. He's got this way of looking at you, like he knows what you're thinking before you do. And there's something else." She paused, her eyes wide with the weight of what she was about to say. "I found something in the estate, in one of the old guest rooms. It was after Mr. Grayson started coming around more. I was cleaning, and I saw a book, a ledger, I think hidden under a floorboard. I didn't read it, I swear, but I saw Miss Clara's name on it, and some numbers, like it was keeping track of something." Miss Marple's pulse quickened again, but she kept her expression neutral. "A ledger, you say? Hidden under a floorboard? That's most intriguing. Did you tell anyone about it?" "No, ma'am." Lucy's voice rose, then dropped as she glanced at the door. "I was afraid to. Mr. Grayson was in the house that day, and I didn't want him to know I'd seen it. I put it back quick as I could, but I keep thinking about it, and now with the brooch and all, I'm scared he's up to something awful." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "You were right to come to me, Lucy. Now, this ledger, can you show me where you found it? I think it might help us understand what Mr. Grayson is after." Lucy's eyes widened further, a mix of relief and fear. "You'd come to the estate with me? Oh, Mum, I'd feel better if you did. But we'd have to be careful. Miss Eleanor's not herself, and Mr. Grayson's been staying late some nights." Miss Marple smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Careful is my middle name, my dear. Shall we go tomorrow morning, when Mr. Grayson is likely to be elsewhere?" Lucy nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll meet you at the estate gate at 9, if that's all right." "Perfect," Miss Marple said, rising to pour more tea. "And don't worry, Lucy. We'll get to the bottom of this, quietly and sensibly." As Lucy left, clutching her shawl against the evening chill, Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind alight with possibilities. The ledger could be the key to Clara's past and Victor's intentions. But the estate was vast, and Victor was no fool. She'd need more than luck to outwit him. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. The kind of autumn day that made St. Mary Mead feel like a painting. All golden leaves and soft mist. Miss Marple, dressed in her sensible tweed coat and carrying a basket that looked innocent enough to pass for a neighborly visit, walked the winding lane to the Harley estate. Lucy was waiting at the rusted iron gate, her face pale but resolute. "You came?" Lucy whispered, as if surprised. "Of course, my dear," Miss Marple replied, patting her arm. "Now, let's be quick and quiet. Where's this guest room?" Lucy led her through the estate's overgrown gardens, where rose bushes tangled with weeds and a stone fountain stood dry and cracked. The house itself loomed ahead, its Georgian elegance marred by peeling paint and sagging shutters. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and neglect. Lucy glanced nervously down the hall before guiding Miss Marple up a creaking staircase to the second floor. "It's this way," Lucy said, her voice hushed. "The room's not used much. Miss Eleanor keeps it locked, but I know where the key is." They reached a heavy oak door, its brass knob tarnished. Lucy retrieved a key from a nearby vase cleverly hidden. Miss Marple noted and unlocked the door. The room was dim, its windows half covered by moth-eaten curtains. A four-poster bed stood against one wall, its canopy sagging, and a dusty dresser held a cracked mirror that reflected their anxious faces. "It's under there," Lucy said, pointing to a loose floorboard near the fireplace. "I noticed it when I was sweeping. It wobbled, and I got curious." Miss Marple knelt, her knees protesting only slightly, and examined the floorboard. It was indeed loose, its edges worn as if lifted many times. With Lucy's help, she pried it up, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside lay a small, leather-bound book, its cover embossed with a faded monogram. "C.H. Clara Hartley," Miss Marple murmured. Lifting the ledger carefully, she opened it, her eyes scanning the neat, looping handwriting. Pages were filled with dates, names, and some transactions, perhaps, but cryptic in their brevity. One entry caught her eye: "To the broker, for services rendered, £500. Sapphire secured." Another, dated a year later: "Betrayal. All lost." Miss Marple's breath caught. The broker again. This ledger was no mere account book. It was a record of Clara's dealings, perhaps her downfall. She tucked it into her basket, covering it with a cloth. "We mustn't linger," she said, standing. "If Victor's as clever as I think, he'll notice if anything's amiss." Lucy nodded, her hands trembling as she replaced the floorboard. But as they turned to leave, a shadow moved in the doorway. Miss Marple's heart skipped, but it was only Eleanor, her face pale and her eyes sharp with suspicion. "Lucy, what are you doing here?" Eleanor's voice was tight, her gaze flickering to Miss Marple. "And Miss Marple, this is unexpected." Miss Marple smiled, her composure unshaken. "Oh, my dear Miss Hartley, I was just admiring your lovely home. Lucy was kind enough to show me this charming room. I do hope we haven't intruded." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she softened slightly. No, it's fine. I wasn't expecting visitors. The estate's in such a state." "Not at all," Miss Marple said smoothly. "It has such character. But we won't keep you. Lucy, shall we?" Lucy bobbed a curtsy. Her face flushed, and they hurried out, Miss Marple's basket heavier with its hidden prize. As they reached the garden, Lucy whispered, "Do you think she saw the ledger?" "I don't think so," Miss Marple replied, her mind already turning to the next step. "But we must be cautious. Victor's influence is strong, and Eleanor's not herself. This ledger might tell us what he's after, but we need to search further. There's mention of a hidden room in Clara's letter. Do you know of any such place?" Lucy frowned, thinking. "There's a part of the West Wing that's always locked. Miss Eleanor says it's unsafe, but I've heard noises there sometimes, late at night. I thought it was just the house settling. But now," Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, "a hidden room would be just the place for secrets. Can you get us access to the West Wing?" Lucy hesitated, then nodded. "There's a service door in the pantry. The key's kept in the kitchen. I could get it tonight, after Miss Eleanor's asleep." "Excellent," Miss Marple said, her voice steady but her mind racing with anticipation. "Meet me here at midnight, Lucy. We'll search that room together, and don't breathe a word to anyone, not even Miss Eleanor." As Lucy agreed and slipped away, Miss Marple walked back to St. Mary Mead, the ledger a quiet weight in her basket. The village was peaceful, its cottages glowing softly in the dusk, but her thoughts were anything but calm. Victor Grayson was closing in on something, perhaps the necklace, perhaps something more, and she was determined to find it first. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the ledger open on her lap. The entries were maddeningly vague, but they painted a picture of Clara's desperation. Names like the broker and sums of money hinted at a world of intrigue Miss Marple hadn't expected from the prim governess she'd once known. One entry, dated just before Clara's death, read, "The room holds the truth. Forgive me." The room, could it be the West Wing? At 11:30, Miss Marple donned her darkest shawl and slipped out, her steps silent on the cobblestones. The night was cool, the stars sharp overhead. She reached the Harley estate just as the church clock struck midnight, and Lucy was waiting, a lantern in her hand and the pantry key clutched tightly. "You're sure about this, ma'am?" Lucy whispered, her breath visible in the chill air. "Quite sure," Miss Marple replied, her voice steady. "Now, lead the way." They entered through the pantry, the scent of stale flour and spices mingling with the damp air. Lucy's lantern cast flickering shadows as they navigated narrow corridors, past rows of dusty shelves and forgotten preserves. The service door to the West Wing was heavy, its lock stiff, but the key turned with a reluctant groan. The West Wing was colder, its air thick with disuse. Cobwebs draped the corners, and the floorboards creaked ominously underfoot. Lucy led Miss Marple to a paneled wall at the end of a hallway, where a faint seam suggested a hidden door. "It's here," Lucy said, her voice barely audible. "I've never gone in, but I've seen Miss Eleanor stare at this wall, like she knows something's behind it." Miss Marple ran her fingers along the seam, feeling for a catch. Her touch found a slight indentation, and with a gentle push, a panel clicked open, revealing a narrow passage. The air inside was musty, heavy with the weight of secrets long buried. "Stay close," Miss Marple whispered, taking the lantern from Lucy. The passage sloped downward, its walls rough and unadorned. At its end was a small door, its wood warped, but sturdy. Miss Marple tested the handle locked. "Try the key," she said, and Lucy fumbled with the pantry key. It didn't fit, but a second key, smaller and hidden in Lucy's pocket, did. The door opened with a creak, revealing a small, circular room lit only by their lantern. The room was bare save for a single table, on which sat a dusty wooden box. Miss Marple approached, her heart pounding. The box was unlocked, and inside lay a journal, its pages yellowed but intact. The cover bore Clara's initials, and a quick glance confirmed it was a continuation of the ledger detailed account of her dealings with the broker. Before Miss Marple could read further, a noise echoed from the passage of footstep, heavy and deliberate. Lucy gasped, and Miss Marple's hand shot up, silencing her. She closed the box, tucking the journal into her shawl, and pulled Lucy behind the table. The footsteps grew closer, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Victor Grayson, his face sharp and predatory in the lantern's glow. Well, he said, his voice smooth but edged with menace. "Miss Marple, you're more resourceful than I gave you credit for." Miss Marple stood, her posture calm but her eyes steely. "Mr. Grayson," she said evenly, "I might say the same of you. Care to explain why you're wandering the West Wing at this hour?" Victor's smile was cold. "I could ask you the same, but I suspect we're after the same thing. Clara's secrets are valuable, aren't they?" Miss Marple's mind raced. He hadn't seen the journal, but he knew enough to be dangerous. "Secrets are only valuable to those who understand them," she said, her tone deceptively mild. "And I'm afraid you're rather late to this particular game." Victor's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Lucy let out a small cry, stumbling against the table. The lantern tipped, its flame flickering wildly in the chaos. Miss Marple grabbed Lucy's arm and pulled her toward the passage, trusting the shadows to hide them. They slipped through the door as Victor lunged, his curse echoing behind them. The passage was a blur of darkness and fear. But Miss Marple's steps were sure. They emerged into the pantry, locking the service door behind them, and fled into the night. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple locked the door and set the journal on her table, her breath steadying. Lucy was pale, her hands shaking, but she managed. A weak smile. "We got it, didn't we?" "We did," Miss Marple said, her voice warm with approval. "And now, my dear, we have work to do. This journal may tell us everything we need to know about Victor and Clara's past." As Lucy nodded, exhausted but determined, Miss Marple opened the journal, its pages promising answers to questions that had haunted St. Mary Mead for decades. The night was far from over, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 8. The hidden room there in the Harley estate was thick with the scent of aged wood, and secrets long buried. Miss Marple moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridor, her sensible shoes whispering against the worn floorboards. Lucy, the young maid, trailed close behind, clutching a brass candlestick that flickered nervously in her trembling hand. The estate, with its sagging beams and peeling wallpaper, seemed to lean in, as if eager to overhear their mission. The discovery of Clara Hartley's letter in the previous chapter had set Miss Marple's mind ablaze. Its cryptic reference to a hidden room in the estate, promising answers to the enigma of Victor Grayson's intentions. Now, with the night cloaking their movements, they were on the hunt for that very room. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her age, scanned the hallway. The letter had mentioned a chamber veiled by time, tucked behind the heart of the hearth. She had puzzled over the phrase for hours, turning it over in her mind like a piece of knitting she couldn't quite unravel. The hearth, she reasoned, must refer to one of the estate's many fireplaces, and the library where Clara's letter had been found seemed the most likely place to start. It was the room where Eleanor Hartley, Clara's niece, spent much of her time, and where Victor had been seen lingering too often for it to be coincidence. "Miss Marple," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible over the creak of the house. "Are you sure about this? If Miss Eleanor finds us poking about, or worse, if Mr. Grayson—" "Hush, dear," Miss Marple said gently, her tone carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced far greater dangers than a creaky old house. "We're not stealing anything, merely exploring. And if Mr. Grayson is who I think he is, he'll be far too preoccupied to notice us tonight." Lucy nodded, though her wide eyes betrayed her nerves. The girl was loyal to Eleanor. That much was clear, but her fear of Victor Grayson ran deep. Miss Marple had sensed it at the village fete, when Lucy's trembling hands had betrayed her guilt over the missing brooch. A misunderstanding Miss Marple had swiftly resolved. Lucy's gratitude had blossomed into trust, and now, here they were, allies in a quest that felt more like one of Miss Marple's novels than she cared to admit. They reached the library door, its heavy oak surface carved with faded vines. Miss Marple pushed it open, and the hinges groaned in protest. The room was a cavern of shadows, the moonlight filtering through tall, dusty windows to cast silver streaks across the shelves. The fireplace loomed at the far end, its mantel adorned with chipped porcelain figurines and a tarnished silver candelabra. Miss Marple approached it, her fingers tracing the cold stone. "The heart of the hearth," she murmured, her mind racing. "Clara was fond of riddles, wasn't she?" Lucy hovered at her side, holding the candlestick higher. "She was, ma'am. Miss Eleanor used to tell stories about Aunt Clara's games hiding things, leaving clues. Drove the family mad," she said. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Clever woman. Let's see if we can play her game." She knelt before the fireplace, ignoring the ache in her knees. The hearth was wide, its interior blackened by years of soot. She ran her hands along the inner edges, feeling for anything unusual. A loose brick, a hidden catch. Lucy watched, her breath catching every time a floorboard creaked elsewhere in the house. Minutes passed, and Miss Marple's fingers brushed against a small metal protrusion tucked in the corner of the hearth. It was cold, smooth, and slightly raised, like a lever disguised as part of the stonework. She pressed it, and a soft click echoed in the silence. A section of the wall beside the fireplace shifted, revealing a narrow seam. Lucy gasped. "Is that?" "I believe so," Miss Marple said, her voice steady but her heart quickening. She pushed against the wall, and it gave way, swinging inward to reveal a dark, musty passage. The air that rushed out smelled of damp earth and forgotten time. She glanced at Lucy, who looked torn between awe and terror. "Stay close, dear," Miss Marple said, taking the candlestick from Lucy's hand. "And mind your step." The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. Cobwebs clung to the walls, and the floor was uneven, forcing Miss Marple to move with care. The candle's flame danced, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. Lucy followed, her breathing shallow, her hands clutching the hem of her apron. After a few steps, the passage opened into a small, circular room. It was no larger than a pantry, its walls lined with warped wooden panels. A single, dust-covered table stood in the center, holding a leather-bound journal, a tarnished inkwell, and a scattering of yellowed papers. The air was heavy, as if the room itself had been holding its breath for decades. Miss Marple set the candlestick on the table, her eyes fixed on the journal. Its cover was embossed with a faint crested lion and a rose, the Hartley family emblem. She opened it carefully, the pages crackling under her touch. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if written under duress. "Clara's, Miss Marple," said softly, recognizing the same script from the letter. She began to read, her voice low but clear, as if speaking to the room itself. "March 12th, 1898. The broker came again tonight. He thinks me a fool, but I see his game. The sapphire is mine, not his, and I'll not let him take it. He speaks of trust, but his eyes are cold. I've hidden it where no one will look, not even him. The heart of the hearth holds more than warmth." Miss Marple paused, her mind racing. The sapphire necklace, the one Inspector Craddock had mentioned, was at the heart of this mystery. Clara's words confirmed it was no mere trinket, but a prize worth betraying for. And the broker, whoever he was, had been her partner, or perhaps her adversary. Lucy peered over her shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it mean, ma'am? Is the necklace in this room? Not likely," Miss Marple said, her eyes scanning the barren walls. Clara was too clever for that. "But this journal may tell us where to look next." She turned the pages, each one revealing more of Clara's story. The entries spoke of late-night meetings, coded messages, and a growing distrust of the broker. One passage caught Miss Marple's attention. "He thinks I don't know his true name. Reginald Vance. A charming devil, but a devil nonetheless. He believes the sapphire will make him untouchable, but I've ensured it will be his ruin. The room will keep my secrets, and the key lies with the lion's gaze, Reginald Vance." Miss Marple repeated, her mind connecting dots. Victor Grayson's familiarity with Clara's past, his charm, his insistence on the Hartley estate, it all pointed to a connection. Could he be Vance's son? Or perhaps a protege? The thought sent a chill through her, but she pushed it aside. Speculation was useless without proof. She closed the journal and tucked it under her arm. "We'll take this with us, Lucy. It's safer in my hands than here." Lucy nodded, but her eyes darted toward the passage. "Did you hear that?" Miss Marple froze. A faint sound, like the scuff of a boot, echoed from the direction of the library. The candle flickered, as if caught in a draft. Her heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. "Quickly, dear. Blow out the candle and stay behind me," Lucy obeyed, plunging the room into darkness. Miss Marple's eyes adjusted slowly. Guided by the faint moonlight seeping through the passage, she moved toward the exit, the journal pressed against her chest. The sound came again, closer now, deliberate. Someone was in the library. They reached the passage's entrance, and Miss Marple peered out. The library was still, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. A shadow moved near the fireplace, tall and lean, unmistakable. Victor Grayson. Miss Marple's mind raced. If he found them here, their advantage would be lost. She gestured for Lucy to stay silent and pointed to a nearby bookshelf, its bulk offering cover. They slipped behind it, crouching low. Victor's footsteps were slow, methodical, as if he were searching for something or someone. He paused by the fireplace, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. Miss Marple watched as he ran his hands along the mantel, then the hearth, his movements eerily similar to her own earlier search. He muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, but the frustration in his tone was clear. He hadn't found the lever. Miss Marple's grip tightened on the journal. If Victor knew about the hidden room, he was closer to the truth then. She'd feared. But why now? What had prompted this midnight search? Her thoughts flickered to Eleanor, alone in her room upstairs. Was she safe? Or was Victor's presence here a sign of something more sinister? The shadows shifted, and Victor moved toward the door. Miss Marple held her breath, willing him to leave. But he stopped, his head tilting as if he'd heard something. For a moment, she feared Lucy had made a sound, but the girl was still as stone beside her. Then, a new sound, a soft thud from upstairs. Victor's head snapped up, and he strode out of the library, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Miss Marple waited, counting to 10 in her head, before whispering, "Now, Lucy, we must go." They slipped out from behind the bookshelf, moving swiftly through the library and into the main hall. The estate was a maze of shadows, but Miss Marple knew the layout well enough from her earlier visit. She led Lucy to a side door that opened onto the garden, where the cool night air greeted them like a balm. Once outside, Miss Marple paused, her eyes scanning the darkness. The estate's grounds were silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the wind. She handed the journal to Lucy. "Keep this safe, dear. Take it to your room and lock it away. I'll come for it tomorrow." Lucy clutched the journal, her face pale but resolute. "What about you, ma'am? What if he comes back, Miss?" Marple's smile was small but firm. "I've dealt with worse than Mr. Grayson. Now go. And don't speak of this to anyone, not even Miss Eleanor. Not yet." Lucy hesitated, then nodded and hurried toward the servants' quarters. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind already turning to the journal's contents. Reginald Vance, the lion's gaze, the sapphire necklace. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. She made her way back to St. Mary Mead, her cottage a beacon of warmth in the chilly night. As she settled into her armchair, the journal's weight a phantom in her hands, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Victor Grayson was no mere opportunist. He was driven, perhaps dangerously so, by a past that intertwined with Clara's, and the hidden room, with its dusty secrets, had only deepened the mystery. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to her knitting, lying untouched on the table. She picked it up, her needles clicking softly as she worked. The rhythm soothed her, as it always did, and with each stitch, her thoughts grew clearer. Tomorrow, she would decode the journal's cryptic entries, Tomorrow, she would find the lion's gaze. And tomorrow, she would be one step closer to unmasking Victor Grayson. For now, though, she wore upon, and the night stretched on, silent but for the secrets it held. Chapter 9. The broker's identity. Miss Marple sat at her small oak desk, the lamplight casting a warm glow over the pages of Clara Hartley's dusty journal. The cottage was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Outside, St. Mary Mead slumbered under a blanket of stars. But within these walls, Miss Marple's mind was alight with the puzzle of Victor Grayson and the elusive figure known as the broker. The journal, retrieved from the hidden room at the Harley estate, lay open before her, its faded ink a whisper from the past. She adjusted her spectacles, her fingers tracing the cryptic entries as she sought to unravel their meaning. The journal was a labyrinth of half-truths and veiled references. Clara had written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, as though fearful of being caught. Yet, beneath the urgency, there was a meticulousness that spoke of a woman desperate to preserve her secrets. Miss Marple turned a page, her eyes narrowing, at a passage circled in red ink. The broker moves like a shadow, unseen but ever present. He took everything, my trust, my future, my sapphire. But I know his name, and I will carry it to my grave. Below it, in a different ink, was a single word: Reginald. Reginald Vance, Miss Marple murmured, leaning back in her chair. The name had surfaced in Inspector Craddock's old case files. A man presumed dead after vanishing in the wake of the sapphire necklace theft decades ago. Could Victor be his son, driven by a vendetta to reclaim his father's ill-gotten legacy? The thought sent a shiver through her, not of fear but of anticipation. She had faced many a mystery in her time, and each one was a tapestry of human nature, woven with threads of greed, love, and betrayal. This one, she sensed, was no different. She rose, her movements spry despite her years, and crossed to the window. The night was still, but her mind churned with possibilities. Victor's charm, his calculated vagueness, his sudden appearance in St. Mary Mead, it all pointed to a deeper motive. The journal hinted at a double cross, a betrayal that had left Clara penniless and the broker a fugitive. If Victor was indeed Reginald's son, his pursuit of the sapphire necklace was not just about wealth, but about settling a score. But with whom? Clara was long gone, and her niece, Eleanor, seemed more victim than villain in this tangled affair. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock. Nearly 10 o'clock, an unusual hour for visitors in St. Mary Mead. She smoothed her cardigan and opened the door to find Eleanor Hartley herself, her face pale and her eyes wide with unease. "Miss Marple," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry to disturb you so late, but I didn't know where else to turn." "Come in, my dear," Miss Marple said, stepping aside. "A cup of tea will do us both good. Now, what's troubling you?" Eleanor sank into the armchair by the fire, her hands twisting in her lap. She was a striking woman, with sharp cheekbones, and dark hair pulled into a severe bun. But tonight she looked diminished, as though the weight of her family's secrets had finally broken through her composure. Miss Marple busied herself with the kettle, giving Eleanor time to gather her thoughts. She had learned long ago that silence was often the best invitation for confession. "It's Victor," Eleanor said at last. "He's been at the estate again, asking questions about Aunt Clara. He's different now, more insistent. He says he knows things about her past that could ruin our family's name. I don't know what to believe, but he's pushing me to sell the estate, to let him handle everything. I think he's after something specific, but he won't say what." Miss Marple poured the tea, her mind racing. Victor's influence over Eleanor was growing, just as Lucy, the maid, had warned. She handed Eleanor a cup and settled into her own chair, her expression one of gentle concern. "What sort of things does he say about Clara?" she asked. Eleanor hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. "He mentioned a scandal, something about a theft. He said Clara was involved with a man who betrayed her, and that there's proof hidden in the estate. He claims he's trying to protect me by finding it first. But I don't trust him. There's something cold in his eyes when he talks about it." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting back to the journal. The mention of a scandal aligned with Clara's cryptic entries about the broker. But Victor's claim of wanting to protect Eleanor felt hollow, a performance designed to lower her guard. "Did he mention a name?" she asked. "Perhaps someone connected to this scandal?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, but he kept talking about a necklace, as though it's the key to everything. I thought he was just being fanciful, but now I'm not so sure." "Miss Marple, do you think he's dangerous?" "Dangerous is a strong word," Miss Marple said carefully. "But I think Victor Grayson is a man with a purpose. And men with purposes can be unpredictable. Tell me, has he ever mentioned a man named Reginald Vance?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "No, but wait. There was something. Last week, he showed me an old photograph, one of those faded sepia ones. It was of Aunt Clara, much younger, standing with a man. Victor said it was someone important to her, but he didn't give a name. Could that have been this Reginald?" Miss Marple's heart quickened. A photograph could be the link she needed, a tangible connection between Victor and the broker. "Do you still have it?" she asked. Eleanor nodded. "It's at the estate. I can bring it tomorrow if you think it's important." "I do," Miss Marple said, her voice firm. "And I think it best if you don't tell Victor about this visit." "Not yet," Eleanor agreed, her shoulders sagging with relief at having shared her burden. After she left, Miss Marple returned to the journal. Her resolve hardened. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. She needed to see that photograph, and she needed to know more about Reginald Vance's fate. If he was truly dead, as Craddock's files suggested, then Victor's motives were rooted in legacy. If not, well, that opened a far more dangerous possibility. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of autumn day that made St. Mary Mead feel like a postcard. Miss Marple, however, had little time for the scenery. She donned her best tweed coat and set off for the village post office, where she knew Mrs. Murgatroyd, the postmistress, kept a wealth of local gossip. If anyone had heard whispers of Reginald Vance or his family, it would be her. The post office was a hive of activity, with villagers collecting parcels and exchanging news. Mrs. Murgatroyd, a stout woman with a penchant for bright scarves, greeted Miss Marple with a knowing smile. "Up to your old tricks, Jane," she said, leaning over the counter. "I saw that young Mr. Grayson in here yesterday, posting a letter to London. Looked like he was in a hurry. Did he now?" Miss Marple said, her tone light, but her mind alert. "Did you happen to see the address?" Mrs. Murgatroyd's eyes gleamed with the thrill of sharing a tidbit. "I did, as it happens. It was to a Mr. Hargreaves, some sort of antiques dealer in Mayfair. I only caught a glimpse, mind you, but it seemed important." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, her thoughts racing. An antiques dealer in Mayfair suggested Victor was looking to sell something valuable, perhaps the sapphire necklace itself. But why now? And why the secrecy? She resolved to contact Inspector Craddock again, hoping his old contacts in London might shed light on this Hargreaves. Back at her cottage, she found a note slipped under the door. It was from Eleanor, written in a hurried scrawl. "Found the photograph. Meet me at the estate at 3. Please come alone." The urgency in the words sent a prickle of unease down Miss Marple's spine. She glanced at the clock 1:30. There was just enough time to prepare. The Harley estate loomed against the afternoon sky, its ivy-clad walls casting long shadows across the lawn. Eleanor met Miss Marple at the gate, her face drawn but determined. She led her to the drawing room, where a small, ornate box sat on the table. Inside was the photograph, a young Clara, radiant in a high-necked dress, standing beside a man with sharp features and a confident smile. The back bore a faint inscription, Clara, N.R.V., London, 1898. Miss Marple studied the man's face, noting the resemblance to Victor, the same angular jaw, the same piercing eyes. "This must be Reginald Vance," she said softly, "and Victor is his son." Eleanor nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more. I found this with the photograph." She handed Miss Marple a folded letter, its edges yellowed with age. It was addressed to Clara, and the handwriting matched the journals. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the lines. "My dearest Clara, you think you've outwitted me, but the broker never forgets. The sapphire is mine, and I will have it, even if it takes a lifetime. Stay silent, or you'll regret it." R.V. The letter was a threat, plain and simple, and it confirmed Reginald Vance as the broker. But it also raised a new question. If Reginald had vanished, how had Victor come to know so much? Was he acting on his father's orders, or was he driven by a son's loyalty to a tarnished name? Before Miss Marple could voice her thoughts, a shadow moved in the doorway. Victor Grayson stood there, his smile as charming as ever, but with a hardness in his eyes. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping into the room. "I see you've been digging into the past. Find anything interesting?" Eleanor gasped. But Miss Marple remained calm, folding the letter and slipping it into her pocket. "Only what you've been hinting at all along, Mr. Grayson," she said. "Or should I say, Mr. Vance?" Victor's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Clever old bird, aren't you?" he said, his tone light but laced with menace. "You're half right. I'll give you that. My father was Reginald Vance, and he was cheated out of what was rightfully his. I'm here to set things straight." "And the sapphire necklace?" Miss Marple asked, her voice steady. "Is that what you're after? Or is it revenge?" Victor laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "A bit of both, perhaps, but you're in over your head, Miss Marple. This isn't one of your quaint village mysteries. Walk away, and I'll let you." Miss Marple met his gaze, her expression serene. "I've never been one for walking away, Mr. Grayson, and I suspect you know that." For a moment, they stood in silence, the air thick with tension. Then Victor turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Eleanor clutched Miss Marple's arm, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" "We go to the charity gala tomorrow," Miss Marple said, her mind already mapping out the next move. "Victor will be there, and I suspect he'll make his play. We need to be ready." As they parted, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill, the kind that came when a mystery began to unravel. Victor was a formidable opponent, but she had faced worse. The journal, the photograph, the letter, they were all pieces of a larger truth, and she was determined to see it through. The gala would be the stage, and she would be ready for whatever Victor had planned. That night, she sat by her fire, the journal open once more. She reread the passage about the broker, her mind turning over the clues. Reginald Vance was the key, but Victor was the wild card. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows of St. Mary Mead, was a sapphire necklace that had sparked a decades-long vendetta. Miss Marple closed the journal and smiled to herself. The game was afoot, and she had no intention of losing. Chapter 10. Gala intrigueth Grand Hall of the St. Mary Mead Community Center glittered under the soft glow of chandeliers, their light refracting through crystal prisms to cast fleeting rainbows across the polished oak floor. The annual charity gala, a cherished tradition in the village, was in full swing. Laughter and the clink of champagne flutes filled the air, mingling with the delicate strains of a string quartet tucked into a corner. The event was a fundraiser for the local library, a cause dear to Miss Jane Marple's heart, and she stood near the edge of the room, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a hawk. Miss Marple, dressed in a modest but elegant lavender gown, her silver hair neatly pinned beneath a delicate lace cap, appeared to all the world like a harmless elderly spinster. But beneath her serene exterior, her mind churned with suspicion. Victor Grayson, the enigmatic stranger who had unsettled her quiet life in St. Mary Mead, was here tonight, and she was certain he was up to no good. His announcement earlier that evening, a grand pledge to fund the restoration of the Harley estate, had won him the adoration of the villagers. But Miss Marple saw through the charm. His smile was too practiced, his gestures too calculated. And now, as she watched him glide through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, she knew he was weaving a web she intended to unravel. The hall was a kaleidoscope of color and movement. Women in flowing dresses twirled with their partners on the dance floor, while men in tailored suits debated local politics over glasses of port. The scent of roses, arranged in towering centerpieces, mingled with the faint aroma of roasted pheasant from the buffet. Miss Marple sipped her elderflower cordial, her gaze never straying far from Victor. He was speaking to Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, his head tilted in that disarming way that made people trust him. But Miss Marple noticed the way his eyes darted toward the far end of the hall, where a man in a poorly fitted suit loitered near the French doors leading to the terrace. The man was an outsider, not one of St. Mary Mead's usual faces. His hair was slicked back with too much pomade, and his tie was slightly askew, as if he dressed in a hurry. He kept his hands in his pockets, his posture slouched, but his eyes were alert, scanning the room like a predator waiting for its moment. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her glass. She had seen men like him before, opportunists, the kind who lurked at the edges of polite society, waiting for a chance to exploit it. "Miss Marple, you're awfully quiet this evening," came a cheerful voice at her side. It was Dolly Bantry, resplendent in a crimson dress that clashed gloriously with her auburn hair. Colonel Bantry's wife was a dear friend, and her knack for gossip was almost as sharp as Miss Marple's knack for deduction. "Oh, Dolly, I'm simply enjoying the spectacle," Miss Marple replied, her voice light, but her eyes still fixed on Victor. "It's a lovely turnout, don't you think?" "Lovely, yes, but I dare say it's Victor Grayson who's stealing the show," Dolly said, following Miss Marple's gaze. "That man's got the whole village eating out of his hand. Did you hear his speech about the Harley estate? So generous. Though, I must say, there's something about him that makes me uneasy. To smooth, if you ask me." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "You're a shrewd judge of character, Dolly." "I was just thinking the same." Dolly raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to Miss Marple's words. "Jane, you've got that look in your eye. What's brewing in that clever head of yours?" Before Miss Marple could reply, a ripple of applause broke out across the room. Victor had taken the stage again, his tailored suit catching the light. As he raised a glass to toast the crowd, "To St. Mary Mead," he declared, his voice rich and commanding, "a village of heart and history, and to the future we'll build together." The crowd cheered, glasses clinking, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. As Victor spoke, She saw him slip something, a folded piece of paper, into the hand of a waiter passing by. The waiter, a young man with a nervous demeanor, glanced at Victor before pocketing the note and weaving through the crowd toward the terrace. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The waiter was heading straight for the man in the ill-fitting suit. "Excuse me, Dolly," Miss Marple said, setting her glass on a nearby table. "I think I need a bit of fresh air." Dolly blinked, surprised, but Miss Marple was already moving. Her steps light and purposeful, she threaded through the crowd, her small frame allowing her to slip past dancers and chatting couples unnoticed. By the time she reached the French doors, the waiter had handed the note to the stranger, who read it quickly before tucking it into his jacket. The stranger glanced around, then stepped out onto the terrace, disappearing into the shadows. Miss Marple hesitated at the threshold. The terrace was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few lanterns strung along the railing. Beyond, the garden stretched into darkness, the air heavy with the scent of lavender and damp earth. She knew it was risky to follow, but the key to Victor's scheme lay with that man, and she couldn't let the opportunity slip. Stepping outside, she kept to the shadows, her soft-soled shoes silent on the flagstones. The stranger was ahead, moving quickly toward the garden path. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her heart pounding but her mind clear. She was no stranger to danger, not after the cases she'd solved over the years. But there was something about Victor Grayson that set her nerves on edge. He was clever, cunning, and, she suspected, desperate. The stranger stopped near a stone bench, glancing over his shoulder. Miss Marple ducked behind a rose bush, her breath catching as a thorn grazed her hand. She ignored the sting, her eyes locked on the man as he pulled the note from his pocket and reread it under the faint light of a lantern. He muttered something to himself, then crumpled the paper and tossed it toward a nearby flower bed. Miss Marple waited until he moved on, disappearing down the path toward the village green. She crept forward, her fingers brushing the damp grass until she found the crumpled note. It was a risky move. She could be seen at any moment, but she unfolded it carefully, squinting to read the scrawled handwriting in the dim light. Midnight. The attic. Bring the tools. Her breath caught. The attic could only mean the Harley estate, where she'd found the locked chest with Lucy. Victor was planning something, and it was happening tonight. But before she could pocket the note, a shadow loomed over her. Miss Marple, came a smooth, familiar voice. "What a surprise to find you out here." She straightened, her heart racing, but her expression serene. Victor Grayson stood before her, his smile as charming as ever, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was holding a glass of champagne, but his free hand rested casually in his pocket, as if ready to draw something out. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice steady. "I was just admiring the roses. The gala is quite the success, thanks to you." He tilted his head, his smile widening. "You're too kind. But I must say, you seem awfully interested in the gardens tonight. Not looking for something, are you?" Miss Marple's mind raced. He couldn't know about the note, not yet, but he was fishing, testing her. She clutched her small handbag, the crumpled note hidden in her palm, and decided to play the innocent old lady. "Oh, you know how it is," she said with a light laugh. "At my age, one gets a bit sentimental about flowers. They remind me of my youth." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile didn't falter. "Of course. Well, I won't keep you from the party. It's a shame to miss the dancing." He offered his arm, clearly expecting her to return with him, but Miss Marple had no intention of letting him control the situation. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson, but I think I'll stay out here a moment longer. The air is so refreshing." For a moment, their eyes locked, and Miss Marple felt the weight of his scrutiny. He knew she was up to something, just as she knew he was. But he merely nodded, his smile tightening. As you wish. Good evening, Miss Marple. As he walked back toward the hall, Miss Marple exhaled, her fingers tightening around the note. She needed to act quickly. The stranger was gone, and Victor was on guard. But there was something else, something she'd noticed as she crouched. In the flower bed, a glint of metal, half buried in the soil, she knelt again, brushing away the dirt to reveal a small key, its head engraved with a sapphire emblem. Her heart skipped a beat. The sapphire necklace, the one Clara Hartley had hidden, the one Victor was so desperate to find. This key could be the answer, the piece that unlocked the mystery. She slipped it into her handbag alongside the note, her mind already racing, ahead to the Hartley estate's attic and the chest that might hold the necklace. Back inside, the gala was reaching its peak. The quartet had shifted to a livelier tune, and couples spun across the dance floor. Miss Marple scanned the room, looking for the stranger, but he was nowhere to be seen. Victor, however, was back, in the thick of things, laughing with a group of local businessmen. She caught his eye for a moment, and the look he gave her was one of amused challenge, as if daring her to make her next move. She needed an ally. Colonel Bantry was across the room, deep in conversation with the vicar, but his wife, Dolly, was closer, sipping champagne near the buffet. Miss Marple approached her, her expression calm, but her tone urgent. "Dolly, I need your help," she said quietly, drawing her friend aside. "There's something afoot tonight, and I can't do it alone." Dolly's eyes widened, her love of intrigue immediately piqued. "Jane, you're up to something. What is it?" "That Grayson fellow." Miss Marple nodded. "He's planning something at the Hartley estate, possibly tonight. I've found a note and a key, and I need to get to the attic before he does. But I can't leave the gala without raising suspicion. Can you keep an eye on him for me?" Dolly grinned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Oh, Jane, you're a marvel. Of course I'll watch him. If he so much as sneezes, I'll know about it." "Thank you," Miss Marple said, squeezing her friend's hand. "And Dolly, be careful. He's not as charming as he seems." With Dolly on watch, Miss Marple slipped out of the hall, using a side door to avoid notice. The night air was cool, and the village was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of the gala and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She made her way to the Hartley estate, her steps brisk despite her age. The key in her handbag felt like a talisman, a promise of answers. The estate loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint glow in the upper floors. Miss Marple let herself in through the servants' entrance, using a spare key Lucy had given her. The house was silent, the air thick with the musty scent of old wood and forgotten memories. She climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The attic was a maze of crates and cobwebs, lit only by a single bulb dangling from the ceiling. The chest was where she'd left it, tucked behind a pile of old furniture. She knelt beside it, her fingers trembling as she pulled the sapphire key from her bag. It fit perfectly, the lock clicking open with a satisfying snap. But before she could lift the lid, a floorboard creaked behind her. She froze, her senses on high alert. Slowly, she turned, expecting to see Victor, but instead, it was Eleanor Hartley, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Miss Marple," Eleanor whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" Miss Marple rose, keeping her voice calm. "Eleanor, I could ask you the same. This is about the necklace, isn't it?" Eleanor's lips trembled, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she might collapse. "Victor, he's been pressuring me. He says the necklace belongs to his family, that my aunt stole it. I didn't know what to do, so I followed you." Miss Marple's mind raced. Eleanor's presence complicated things, but it also confirmed her suspicions about Victor's hold over the Harley family. "Eleanor, listen to me," she said firmly. "Victor is not who he seems. I need you to trust me. Go back to the gala and stay with Dolly Bantry. She'll keep you safe." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Please, Miss Marple, be careful." As Eleanor's footsteps faded down the stairs, Miss Marple turned back to the chest. She lifted the lid, her breath catching as she saw what lay inside, not the sapphire necklace, but a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. She reached for them, but another sound stopped her. A low chuckle from the shadows. "Very clever, Miss Marple," Victor said, stepping into the light. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "But you're too late." Miss Marple's heart thudded, but she kept her composure. "Am I Mr. Grayson? Or are you the one who's been outplayed?" Victor's eyes flickered to the chest, and for a moment, doubt crossed his face. Miss Marple seized the moment, slipping the sapphire key back into her handbag. Whatever happened next, she had the upper hand for now. The attic seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with tension. Victor took a step closer, his hands loose at his sides, but Miss Marple sensed the coiled energy in his posture. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, and she was standing in his way. "You've been busy," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "digging into things that don't concern you. Clara Harley's secrets, my father's legacy. You think you've pieced it all together, don't you?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene, but her mind racing. "I've pieced together enough, Mr. Grayson. Or should I say, Mr. Vance? Your father was Reginald Vance, wasn't he? The broker, who thought he could outsmart Clara Harley and ended up with nothing." Victor's jaw tightened, a flash of anger breaking through his composure. "You're clever, I'll give you that. But you're meddling in things you don't understand. That necklace belongs to my family. Clara stole it, ruined my father, and left us with nothing. I'm just taking back what's mine." "Is that what you told Eleanor?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Or Lucy? You've been manipulating them, haven't you? Playing on their fears, their guilt. But it's not just about the necklace, is it? There's something else you're after." Victor laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the attic. "You think you know me, old woman? You're out of your depth. Hand over the key, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her handbag. The key was her leverage, and she wasn't about to give it up. "I don't think so, Mr. Grayson. You see, I've learned a thing or two about people like you. You're not as clever as you think. That note you passed at the gala midnight, the attic, bring the tools. You're planning to break into this chest, aren't you? But you didn't expect me to get here first." Victor's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she thought he might lunge at her. But he held back, his smile returning, though it was colder now. "You're resourceful, I'll give you that. But you're alone, and I'm not. My associate will be here soon, and he's not as patient as I am." Miss Marple's heart sank, but she refused to show it. The stranger from the gala, the man in the ill-fitting suit, was coming, and she was running out of time. She needed to keep Victor talking, to stall him until she could think of a way out. "Tell me, Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice conversational, as if they were chatting over tea. "Why the gala? Why the grand gesture of restoring the Harley estate? It's a clever cover, I'll admit, but it's also a risk. You've drawn a lot of attention to yourself." Victor's smile faltered, and she saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. You're fishing, Miss Marple. But I'll indulge you. The gala was a means to an end. The villagers love a savior, and I needed their trust. Eleanor's been difficult, but she's coming around. Once I have the necklace, the estate will be mine, and I'll sell it for what it's worth. And the necklace, Miss Marple pressed. What's so special about it? It's not just the money, is it? There's something personal about this for you. Victor's expression darkened, and for a moment, she saw the raw emotion beneath his polished facade. It's everything, he said, his voice low. My father died a broken man because of Clara Hartley. That necklace was his legacy, his proof that he was more than a common thief. I grew up with nothing but stories of what could have been. I'm taking it back, and no one, not you, not Eleanor, will stop me. Miss Marple nodded, her mind piecing together the final threads. Victor wasn't just after wealth. He was driven by a need for vengeance, a son trying to right his father's wrongs. It made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. Before she could respond, a loud creak echoed from the staircase. Victor's head snapped toward the sound, and Miss Marple seized the moment. She stepped back, positioning herself behind the chest, her hand slipping into her handbag. She didn't have a weapon, but she had her wits, and that had always been enough. The stranger from the gala appeared at the top of the stairs, a crowbar in one hand and a flashlight in the other. His eyes darted between Victor and Miss Marple, and he frowned. What's she doing here? An inconvenience, Victor said, his voice clipped. Deal with her. The stranger hesitated, his grip tightening on the crowbar. Miss Marple's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. I wouldn't do that if I were you, she said, addressing the stranger. You're in enough trouble already. I know about the note, and I know what you're planning. The police are on their way. It was a bluff, but it landed. The stranger's eyes widened, and he glanced at Victor. You said this would be clean. No cops. Victor's jaw clenched. She's lying. She's just an old busybody who thinks she's clever. But the stranger wasn't convinced. He took a step back, his flashlight wavering. I'm not going down for this. You promised me a cut, not a prison sentence. Miss Marple saw her. Chance, he's using you, she said, her voice calm but firm, just like he used Eleanor and Lucy. You're the one taking the risk while he walks away with the prize. But there's no necklace in that chest, is there? Mr. Grayson, you've been chasing a ghost. Victor's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, the stranger dropped the crowbar and bolted for the stairs. I'm out, he muttered. Disappearing into the darkness, Victor lunged toward Miss Marple, but she was ready. She stepped aside, using the chest as a barrier, and tossed her handbag to the floor, spilling its contents. The sapphire key glinted in the dim light, and Victor's eyes locked onto it. He dove for it, giving Miss Marple the moment she needed to slip toward the stairs. She didn't look back as she hurried down, her heart pounding. She needed to get to Colonel Bantry or Inspector Craddock, someone who could stop Victor before he disappeared with the key. The gala was still in full swing as she reached the village green, the music and laughter a stark contrast to the danger she'd just escaped. Dolly was waiting by the hall's entrance, her face pale. Jane, where have you been? Victor left the gala 20 minutes ago, and I couldn't find you. He's at the Hartley estate, Miss Marple said, catching her breath. Dolly, I need you to find Colonel Bantry and tell him to call Inspector Craddock. Tell him it's urgent. Dolly nodded, her eyes wide, and hurried back into the hall. Miss Marple glanced at her handbag, now empty except for the crumpled note. The sapphire key was in Victor's hands, but she had something just as valuable: knowledge. She knew his plan, his motives, and his weaknesses, and she wasn't done yet. As she slipped back into the gala, blending into the crowd, she felt a quiet resolve settle over her. Victor Grayson thought he'd won, but he didn't know Jane Marple. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning.